All right, let's get started. Again, I'm Jeff Stauffer. I'm Community Relations Director with Elwell Associates. I also work with our charity, the Elwell Center for the Creative Arts. I've got a sliver of time to talk about our charity, 10 minutes. It's going to be really fast. In hindsight, I should have bought a bigger car. Um, we received donated instruments. We refurbished them through our friends at the band shop in Sykesville. They're wonderful. Um, this just the other day was one of the deliveries that I picked up from the band shop, and also in my trunk. I just have a small 2022 Subaru Crosstrek. I need a Ford F-150, I think. But we're very blessed. I'm blessed to have a pretty large office. Now that doesn't mean I'm important. I've just been here for a while, and I used to have a small office where I tripped over all my instruments, literally would trip over them. So these instruments here, these are all refurbished instruments that are in my office and ready to go out to school music programs. These are instruments that are waiting to be refurbished, and we also have some at the band shop that they're working on right now. We have a drum set. We have all these guitars that are going to the Baltimore Classical Guitar Society, and then we have all these right here that are waiting to go in my car, my little car, take the trip to Sykesville, and get them refurbished with our friends at the band shop. The need is very significant, and we need your support. I get emails, messages every day from community members, teachers, asking for support. This one was a little bit unusual. It was just this past Thursday, I got this message from Emery Denali from the Baltimore School of Music. They did an instrument drive, and they were encouraged to have community members donate instruments that they no longer play. They like what we do here at Elwell Center for the Creative Arts, and they wanted to donate those instruments to our organization, which we are gladly going to accept. It's about 50 of them. So we need that support. Each instrument is $100 to $300 or more to refurbish. So you can kind of do the quick math in your head and see how quickly that adds up. This is a message I got also on Thursday. As I was kind of putting this together, these messages just came in. I'm like, well, what timing? I'm an instrumental music teacher in 2 lower income, high needs elementary schools in Montgomery County. We do a lot of work in Montgomery County. Very few instruments in our inventory. 3/4 of their students cannot financially afford to participate in music. So we are going to support them with as many instruments and as much equipment as possible to support their teacher and their students. You can make a difference, not just a musical difference, but a difference in the lives of children each day by supporting the Elwell Center. Studies show that music, people that participate in music, they perform better in math, reading, and language. Now, if you ever tried to read sheet music, it's like a foreign language if you don't know what you're looking at. I used to know sheet music really, really well, and I was very well versed in it, but now that I don't do it anymore, it's like a foreign language again, so you need to stay with it. It encourages teamwork, cooperation, building communication skills. Music strengthens ties between schools, families, and communities. One of my favorite things to do every year is go to my daughter's concert. She plays the flute at Century High School in the Honors Wind Ensemble. It is one of my favorite evenings of the year. I love it during the December and the May concerts. It requires practice, patience, and resilience, and are those traits that we need every day? Maybe even up to this point this morning, had to practice those traits during your morning. So it also stimulates creativity, imagination, self-expression, helping children have their own confidence in their own voices. And these days, we really need to keep building up our kids' confidence in any way that we can. Music tells a story, and every instrument has a story. We've got instruments that have come from far and wide that are 100 years old. Several weeks ago, we had a gentleman who was 91 years old. He donated a cello to us, and I asked him the story behind it. Back in about 1955, when he was stationed in San Diego for the Navy, he got this instrument from a cello teacher, and he's kept it for about 70 some years, and he wanted to find a good home for it because he was moving and didn't have a place for it. So he considered the Elwell Center, and we gladly accepted his donation. So that's been with him for almost 7 years, and it's gone through many different iterations and different organizations that he's played for, and it found its way to us. So we're very privileged about that. Be the hero. Be the hero in your story. Be the hero in someone else's story, just as importantly. Kids need support. We need your support to help the need that's in the community right now to support music education. My information right here, you can always contact me at our phone number here, jeff@elvillcenter.org. We're always accepting donations for instruments that are in good condition. We always get them refurbished. We have Stephanie in the back. She's running a raffle right now. Please support the Elville Center with a monetary donation. Can't tell you how much it means to us. I would like to also bring up Berta Sabrio, who is the executive director at the Columbia Orchestra. And Berta has a few words about the Columbia Orchestra, and we have supported the Columbia Orchestra family concert series for many, many years through different sponsorships, and we're very pleased to do that. Berta, I'd love for you to come up and talk a little bit about the concert series and the Columbia Orchestra. Come on up.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here and to bring our string quartet out to provide some music for you guys. We are so thankful also for the support of Jeff and Steve. They never say no. They're always happy to lend a hand and help us put on some great music. The Columbia Orchestra is a community orchestra of volunteers. Everyone who plays is a volunteer for the orchestra from our community. So they're making music for our community, and they are also a community on their own. I want to tell you a little bit about our Young People's Concert Series. We have this concert every year, and it's full. We do 2 performances, and it's this great opportunity for us to introduce students, children, and adults to the orchestra. We do that through performing Peter and the Wolf, which is a wonderful way, if you remember, to learn all about the instruments and their sounds within a story. This year, we are also doing music from Bluey. And if you don't know who Bluey is, ask your grandchildren, because they will tell you. Bluey is this wonderful character. He and his family are very family involved. He also is a little bit of a prankster, similar to Peter in Peter and the Wolf. So the stories really go well together. That concert is November 1st. We have 2 concerts that day, and I will have more information about that in the lobby if you'd like to stop by. Also, finally, I want to invite you. We have a community orchestra event tomorrow at the Chrysalis, which is near Meriwether Post Pavilion. It's a free concert. It starts at 4 o'clock, and the orchestra will be there, and our string quartet will also be there playing. So we hope to see you then. Thank you, and thank you again, Jeff and Steve.
Nice you. Okay. Well, what in the world is this back here? What is this? It's not every day you find a big check just sitting around. Hey, Bill, can you come up here? So Madeira Wealth, who we've known for a good while, the Huffnells and Dan, back to when they were Bay Point in Annapolis. We really appreciate your support. And so do you want to say a couple words about this big check that we have here?
Well, just we're very happy to be able to provide it, and we really think you guys do such great things. And I have a few things in my presentation that are concerned with music as well that I'll expand upon a little bit. So we're very happy to give it to you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so very much. So $1,500 to the Elville Center for the Creative Arts from Madeira Wealth. Thank you. And we also have one more thing. He's a very generous guy.
So I went to a fundraiser over on Kent Island for an organization that helps the homeless and those that are needy over there. And I walked into the lobby area, and they had a basket of wine you could bid on, and it's a silent auction. And then they had this guitar that was absolutely beautiful, caught my eye right away. And I said, geez, I would love to have that. And then my wife said, no, you would love to give that to Steve Elville for his organization. So I'm here to present this to you, Steve. I know it'll go to good use. And let me take it out. I'll let you hold this so I can take it out.
Wow, Bill, thank you. Thank you. Wow. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And
This
that's
is
what
a,
and that's what I said when I saw it. It was just sitting there.
a PRS guitar.
It's Paul Reed Smith guitar, manufactured in Kent Island in Maryland, and so it's a beautiful guitar. We know it'll go to good use. And to top things off, Paul, I had him Paul Reed Smith, offered to autograph.
Oh my goodness. It's autographed.
So, anyways, this is for you. And for
Bill,
information.
thank you.
For sure, it'll go to good work. So,
Thank you so very much.
yeah, you're welcome.
Oh my goodness.
Put it back.
Bill Huffnell, the Moderna Wealth, incredibly generous. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And I can't even begin to name the modern or top talent that plays PRS guitars. Many of you are much more expert at that than I am. Wow, Bill. Thank you.
Just one thing I left off. This is a John Mayer designed guitar with Paul Reed Smith. So that's the guitar. It's a silver Elite SE, but designed by John Mayer.
Oh my goodness.
So
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Bill. You're so generous. Thank you. Thank you. I'm blown away. I'm speechless. Thank you so much. Thank you.
sure.
The first time Steve has ever been speechless. First time for everything. Okay. So each year when we consider our featured presenters, we look for the perfect blend of expertise, trust, and a connection, professionals who truly embody our theme and values each year. And today we're proud to welcome Bill Huffnell, Billy Huffnell, they are related, I promise, and Dan Abinger, wealth managers and principals with Madeira Wealth Management. Madeira is a fee-only fiduciary firm with roots dating back to 1983. Today, they employ over 200 professionals across 19 offices along the East Coast, managing nearly $15 billion in assets for more than 6,000 clients. And the firm is majority employee-owned, guided by values of confident humility, a contagious growth mindset, and trusted relationships. And their mission, which is to make a lasting positive impact in the lives of clients and colleagues, truly resonates with us. And their excellence hasn't gone unnoticed. In 2025, Madeira ranked number 2 among USA Today's best financial advisory firms for registered investment advisors. They've been recognized by Investment News as one of the fastest growing fee-only RIAs, and for 9 consecutive years have appeared in Pensions and Investments Best Places to Work in Money Management. So Bill, Billy, and Dan, we know your time is very valuable. You could be anywhere today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Put it here if I could. Oh, that's the clicker. Okay. Yep. This down. Yep. Good. Yep. Thank you, Jeff, very much, and thank you to Steve and to Gary for having us today. I had just a couple comments to start with, and I didn't have an opportunity to see Jeff's slides, but one thing I was going to mention just with respect to musicians, some musicians are in a position where they can do it for a career. Most do it as a second job or as a hobby or whatever. But what I have found is pretty consistently, I had a opportunity, this is 30 years ago, to hire a financial analyst, and the 2 final candidates were one from GW, one from University of Maryland. GW was a finance major, really smart guy, would have made a really good financial analyst. And then the other candidate was an accounting degree with a major, double major, and his second major was music. And I hired him. And that's when I learned that what music can really do for an individual. And Jeff described some of the things. And, you know, I just wrote a couple things down. They're good problem solvers. They're excellent listeners. They are exceptionally good team players. You have to play in a quartet and be coordinated. They're very good at seeing what's in front of them, but expecting what's coming next, because you got to begin to flip the page for the next things. And so the mindset and the thinking and the abilities of musicians, to me, is just outstanding. And just coincidentally, we just hired a financial planner out of Towson, and she plays the flute. And from the beginning, when she told me that, I said, you've got an edge on getting this position right away, because we are always looking to hire somebody that's got, you know, an arts or a music background. Anyways, so I wanted to mention that. And then That's it. I just wanted to make sure I thanked everybody, including everybody in attendance today. Um, I think a critical part of making sure that you're in a position to take care of your family, to manage your wealth, to do all the things that we want to do with respect to financial planning, wealth management, estate planning, is to be informed and being educated. And so I think taking time on a Saturday morning here, I commend you for coming here. There was trying to think, it was a retailer. I'm old enough to remember, and maybe some others are too. There was a couple in Baltimore. There was one over in Rockville, and I think Tyson's Corner. And the company was out of New Jersey, and the founder was Cy Sims, and it was the Sims Corporation. And it was a sort of a discount retailer, and they did commercials all the time. But their slogan was one that always stuck with me, and that was, "An educated consumer is our best customer." And so for you to take the time today to become more educated, to become more informed, I think makes it much easier for you to make sure that you really accomplish the goals for your family. And it makes it much easier us for help to implement a lot of the things that need to be done to make sure that you accomplish your goals. So just housekeeping real quickly. You can ask questions anytime. We're happy to answer them. And then I think we're going to run a full 50, but we'll do our best to leave some time for Q&A. So if you want to catch us in between for questions, please feel free to do so. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to go over the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and then what its impacts are to some charitable planning. We have this view of always taking a comprehensive approach, and so we just want it's sort of outside specifically some of the topics we're talking about today, but I want to show you how it sort of ties into it, go over some key concepts, look at some charitable planning tools and some ideas relative to that, and then finally we'll do some examples and calculations that helps bring all of this information into context and how it works. So, presenting today will be Dan and myself. Billy's here just to sort of keep it straight, make sure we don't tell any lies. And then I just want to do a quick introduction. Dan, so one thing I would say to you that sometimes gets glossed over is because we all have these various letters after our name. And in our opinion, those letters are critical because we think working with somebody that's competent and that has proven that they want to stay up to date and educated and remain competent, have these designations. And so Dan is a certified financial planner. He's a certified, a chartered financial analyst, and he's also a certified private wealth advisor. Those are very, elite designations within our industry. Billy is a certified financial planner and also a certified private wealth advisor. And then I'm a CFP, which I started with Stegman and Company, the CPA firm out of Towson, Maryland, in 1984. So it's been amazing. It's been that long, but I've been doing tax and accounting work since that time. And then I entered the wealth management firm or industry maybe 33 years ago or so. It says 2 decades. We were talking earlier. They wanted to put 3. I said, just leave it 2 because earlier in life, you want it to be a larger number, and then later in life, you sort of want to lower the number a little bit. So I told him 2 is still accurate, even if it was 4. So a couple things. Let me just see. I missed one page of my notes. Excuse me. So a little bit about Dan. Dan is the company geek. That's a compliment. Dan truly will put an Excel worksheet together that will absolutely confuse you, and it makes absolutely good sense. And it's not the fact that he can do it; it's the fact that he enjoys doing it and looks for opportunities to do it. Conversely, when we have our team meetings and we're sitting around the conference room, Dan is sort of our class clown. And this weekend, his dear wife Christy is traveling, so he has 3 beautiful young children. So he is playing Mr. Mom for the weekend, and he's
Don't ask me where they are though.
Yeah, that's right. I think they're not out in the.
They're in the car.
They're in the car. Yes. I wasn't sure. Right. That's funny.
Old enough. I
Funny.
think they'll be okay.
So and so Dan has all the skills that I described earlier that you typically see in a musician, and it just so happens that Dan is a musician and he plays the guitar, and so just sort of reinforces my whole generalization relative to.
And to be clear, he did not tell me about the PRS before he decided to make the donation, so I didn't have the opportunity to make a call for it. So
Oh, that's funny. I thought you were going to play like the first 6 drums of "Smoke on the Water" for us. So
set the stage.
and then Billy. So an interesting thing about Billy is that this is his last week in the world as a single man. So next Saturday, actually right here, not just down the road in Ellicott City, he will be a married man. And yes, thank you. And he has a keen interest in estate planning. Oops, I switched my thing. And you can see some of the other specialties there. And then he's also very good at giving his dad the eye when I'm talking too much. So he sort of, I look at him and he's like, cut. And so he'll keep me on track here. And I say that half facetiously, but it really does happen. So so that's our team. Okay, so just a quick summary of, I'm going to call it the bill because I get tired of saying the OBBBA. So the bill.
We do OBA. OBA was a pretty
OBA,
good.
oh, is that a new one? Oh, okay, I didn't hear that.
That was
So-
good. We do it.
So there was some legislation passed back in 2017, and when they pass legislation nowadays, sorry, I'll stay closer to the mic. I apologize. When they pass legislation, there used to be a time when you'd pass legislation and it just sort of stayed in place. Now there's various phase outs and sunsets, and so they'll put a law in place, but it'll only be good for 6 years, and so you always have to consider when these phase outs are implemented, or when the phase outs, or excuse me, when the sunsets end. And so there was several of those built into the 2017 law, most of which were due to end January 1st of 2026. So the new law, the new act, either extended those or made those permanent. And so that actually provided a lot of relief in a lot of areas, and we'll go into the detail a little bit. So, it has, I'm only going to cover some of the items that I think are probably more relevant. There was several things in there that we sort of left off because it gets into too much detail. But if you have a question on one that's not on here, please feel free to ask. Big changes to income taxes, favorable. Some changes to itemized deductions. There's some things specifically written in there that are associated with charitable planning. And then, the most significant change probably is that, we had this federal tax exemption amount that was 5.5 million in 2016. The 2017 bill doubled it to 11 million roughly. With inflation, it's gone up to close to 14 million this year. And then starting next year, it would revert back to 7,500,000 or some number close to that. That is no longer the case. We now have a permanent, in quotes, right? Because permanent in tax law is really never permanent. It's till the next administration or to whatever the next thoughts are. But as of right now, there's no expiration on that $15 million. $15 million exempted from state taxes for both spouses, so $30 million in total. And then it's sort of like there's some of the changes are permanent, some of them are temporary, some of them happen immediately, and some of them happen starting in 2026. So I'm going to go through some of the key ones now. So the income tax brackets were supposed to increase, and with the highest bracket going at 39%, the law kept the brackets just where they are today, so that was a good change. In the very beginning, you heard things about no tax on tips. We're going to not tax Social Security. Don't tax overtime. Well, what was initially proposed and what ended up happening ended up being a little bit different, but I think essentially to a large degree it did accomplish what they were trying to do to a great extent. And so there's a senior deduction now that is starts this year, ends in 2025, that if you're over 65 or over, you get to take an above the line, meaning you don't have to itemize, a $6,000 deduction off your tax return. Just right off your tax return, you reduce your income by $6,000, and it's eligible for both spouses, and so it's $12,000. As I mentioned earlier, all of these provisions, or at least most of them, are subject to phase outs, and I'm not going to go through the phase outs because they're all different amounts, but once you hit a phase out amount is when the benefit gets reduced, and in some cases it gets eliminated. But that's a new provision. It's effective 2025, and it could be quite effective. It's $12,000 off your potentially your taxable income. They increased the child and dependent care from I think it was $2,000. They increased it to $2,200, so that was a good change. The items that don't have a second date on them means there's no sunset on them, so that is just a permanent change that they made. A significant change is state and local income taxes, particularly for us in Maryland, because we have one of the higher income tax states in the country, and so when the 2017 Act was put in place in the beginning of 2019, you were not allowed to deduct more than $10,000 in state and local income taxes, and that included your real estate taxes. And so you really got essentially no benefit from any state taxes you paid. Starting this year and going through 2029, this is the only one that has that 2029 versus 2028. So we got an extra year. You can actually take up to $40,000 in your state and local taxes. So that does open up some opportunities. Again, there's some phase outs, but it might give you the ability to where you took the itemized deduction, took the standard deduction previously. Now you could take an itemized deduction and add it to your, you've got your medical, you've got your state and local taxes, you have your mortgage interest expense, and then you have your charitable. That's all sort of the itemized deductions. And a lot of times before, because it was only $10,000 in the state, it wasn't worth it because you got $31,000 anyways as a standard deduction. So most people, even today, most people take the standard deduction. They don't itemize on their federal tax return. But now that we've got $40,000, if you have a high state income tax amount, then there's some consideration as to whether you can now itemize that and get a better tax benefit. As I mentioned earlier, under the estate tax, the exclusion, that should say estate tax exclusion, not exclusion tax exclusion. The estate tax exclusion increased to $15 million. And so, again, it's increased $15 million today. We know for the next several years it'll be there. There's always the potential later it could come back down. But right now, I forget what the stats are, but based under current legislation, I think there's only 7,000 estate taxes that are estates that are subject to taxes each year. So it's a reasonably small amount relative to the population in the country. The next three, I think, do a pretty good job for middle income, particularly younger individuals. Overtime deduction, it's the half portion. So if you get paid time and a half, the amount that you get paid for the half, you don't have to pay tax on it, and that's up to $12,500 for a single person and up to $25,000 for an individual. So, so for particularly younger folks, where there's people still working in the service industry and they're still working on tips, I think it really could help them significantly. The same with tips. In the service industry, getting tips, you can exclude $25,000, irrespective of whether you file joint or single. It's a $25,000 deduction, and so both of those I think could help tremendously. And then lastly, car interest is deductible again. There's some restrictions as the car has to be assembled in the U.S. and some other things, but you get up to $10,000 a year right off your taxes. If you purchase a car and you finance it, the government will help subsidize it through allowing you to write some of it off against your income taxes. The key thing about a lot of these is these are above the line, so they're not itemized deductions. So irrespective of whether you itemize or not, you get to take these deductions. The state and local taxes that's part of the itemized deductions, but the senior tax, the overtime deduction, tips deduction, those all go above the line, and you're entitled to those irrespective of whether you decide to itemize in your federal return. So a couple key provisions that impact charity. I do have a typo on this. I apologize. In the top right there where it says 2025 plus, that should be 2026. That's sort of a critical one. But um, so there's a new charitable write-off that's allowed now. Again, this is not an itemized. You get it irrespective, and it's on the front of your 1040, and you can put in a line for either 1,000 or 2,000, whether you're single or married. And that's just a write-off in your tax returns. No offsets, no phase out. That's just a deduction you get. My thought sort of on that is it can capture a lot of the. It has to be in cash. It can't go to a donor advised fund, and it has to go to a public charity. And so the smaller checks, a lot of times we write it to the local fire department or to whomever. It's a great place to capture all those and get a nice tax benefit for it. So. The next two are pretty critical and can have some significant impacts just depending on your circumstances. The prior to the 2017 law, only 50% of your charitable contributions were essentially allowed to be deducted, and you could carry it forward after that. But the 2017 law made it 60%. It was supposed to revert back. The new law keeps it at 60%, so that's a positive. However, now, if you make a charitable contribution and you're going to itemize that charitable contribution, starting in 2026, you have to go over a floor amount, and that floor is taken based on your adjusted gross income, which is sort of your total income on the front of the 1040. You multiply it times 0.5%. And then anything above 0.5%, you get to take. Anything that's below that, you just lose the benefit. And so we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some reasons on bringing some of your charitable contributions into 2025, just so you don't hit that floor. And another related item to that is the highest tax bracket right now is 37%. And so if you get a tax write-off of any type, itemized deduction or otherwise, you essentially get 37 cents back on every dollar that you spend. But what they've done now is say, we won't give you the full 37. So if you're in a 37% bracket, which I didn't look, but I think it's 750,000 or something. So it's a fairly high number. Then you only get 35%. So your itemized deductions, if you're on the higher income side and you're making a larger charitable contribution, get impacted fairly significantly starting just in a couple of months. And that's where we bring the idea in of maybe getting those contributions done this year. QCDs, by the way, are not impacted by that, and we'll discuss that as well. So I think I had two client examples, just because sometimes when you hear a story, it helps. And so the increase in the exemption amount to $15 million, we made deliberate efforts to put assets in irrevocable trust that would bypass the estate tax. And now we have clients that will clearly never be subject to it just based on their age and based on their current law. So we have assets in irrevocable trust that have less favorable income tax provisions. They don't get a step up in basis, for example. The tax rate on the trust is higher than a regular. And so we're looking for ways to get the money out, because if we can get the assets distributed, particularly if they're securities that have been there for a long time that have embedded gains, you buy the S&P at 100 and now it's at 200. If it gets distributed from the irrevocable trust, it's subject to gains. If we can get it distributed back out to one of the beneficiaries, they can then keep it and then pass it to their children and not pay any taxes. And so that's sort of what we're trying to do. And then additionally, Dan was mentioning, we had the opportunity with one client that had charitable intents that the assets that were in the irrevocable trust were really the best assets to use because they were highly appreciated. And so we were fortunate enough that the distribution provisions in this trust allowed us to just take all the holdings. So it's just a bunch of mutual funds and exchange traded funds, and we just took them out of the trust and made a distribution of principal and put them into a revocable trust for the client. So now the client owns them and has full control over them. There's other reasons sometimes you don't want to do that I won't go into today, like asset protection and other, but that wasn't the case here. And so By doing so, now we have a client that has the ability to take some of those shares, donate it to charity, leave some to her family. The family gets it without any embedded gain, and it worked out for everybody. And the other thing I was going to mention, um, do I want to mention the change in the income for the 5% floor, or we're going to cover that?
No, we'll call.
Cover that later. All right, very good.
How we doing on time?
Okay. The other thing I was going to mention, this is like a general, and I mentioned it earlier, is if you pay quarterly taxes, and you might be able to take up to the 40,000 now allowed on the SALT deduction, the state and local income taxes. You need to look at when you pay your tax. A long time ago, we did this all the time. When state taxes used to be fully deductible, there was no limit, and so we would look each year and run a projection, usually in the fourth quarter, as to what the tax liability was. You have to pay your state taxes by January 15th, generally. And sometimes we would bring that forward and pay it in December at the end of the previous year. And by doing so, we get the tax benefit in the year where it is more beneficial. And so as you're looking at the end of this quarter, it might make sense, if you're otherwise eligible, to either pull forward the amount or possibly push it back if you might get the benefit in 2026. And I am going to stop there for a second. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask now. I'd be happy to answer. And then Dan's going to go over what our firm does from a planning perspective, taking a comprehensive approach.
Yep. I think we did have a. You want? I'll take the remote. Oh, looks like we do have a question.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
Are the slides going to be made available? Yes. And
Yes.
if I'm wrong, I got the information incorrect.
That's right. Billy was looking real carefully at him when he said that. Like, yes, yes, yes. No, the other thing is, we'll provide a reference to there's an organization called the Tax Foundation, and they have a couple really good write-ups that summarize a lot of the major changes to based on the OBBBA, and also where you can put in your personal information, and it gives you an idea of where you may benefit from the tax law changes.
Sure.
Just offhand for the senior adjusted gross income, do you know what that is for the 6,000?
I think it's 150.
I think it is one. It's 75 single, 150 if you're. So it phases out starting at 150.
150.
150, yeah.
Yeah. So.
That one, it seems, should have been kept a little higher, but who knows when they get into these negotiations. Like every phase out was different. Well, the tips and the overtime were the same, but a lot of the other ones, they just had these numbers in there that I don't know exactly where they got them. For example, the $40,000 phase out starts at $500,000, but the senior phase out starts at $150,000, and I don't know why they made those decisions.
So, well, good. Well, as Bill mentioned, the one thing that we wanted to do is sort of set the stage, because charitable planning is obviously the focus of our conversation today, but I guess comparable to other sort of subject matters that may be important to a client, it's, well, we would argue it is impossible to try to view any planning item in its isolation. And so other things sort of drive decisions or may impact other decisions. And then not everybody's charitably inclined, right? And so oftentimes we have to we sort of say, set the game plan, which is just, what are we trying to accomplish in this particular meeting or with your planning? But it always begins with a review of their goals, objectives, and concerns. And so, again, some of these topics may not be applicable to an individual, but oftentimes charitable planning does come in. Now, everybody has different sort of degrees of charitable inclination. There's also a mix, right? You have individuals that sort of want to have more of a passive exposure, right? So they're donating cash and sort of walking away. You have others that are more actively involved in charities. So they might participate in a food bank or help clean the Severn River as part of the Severn River Association, or a mix of the two. And so sort of understanding sort of what their philanthropic, initiatives are can help us drive sort of the tax planning benefits, because I haven't had anybody ever tell us that they don't want the government to share in some of their charitable endeavors, right? And so that's essentially what we're trying to do. I sort of say in jest with some clients that there's really no economic benefit to donating to charity, which is not true, right? But some people are like, well, how much should I donate to charity to save on income taxes? And I like take a step back and let's just make sure that's something that's important to you so that you get both, right? The sort of the good feeling of helping other individuals or helping other initiatives, as well as receiving the tax benefit. So we threw up an example of sort of our typical templated agenda, but you can see that everything sort of needs to get addressed before we start talking about charitable planning. And you're going to get into some examples as to how different circumstances may lead to different ways of satisfying charitable endeavors. So,
And
Uh,
and then I just want to get back up again. That so when we first engage with a client, we'll often have with a prospective client, we'll often have a specific question relating to one issue. I'd like to create a revocable living trust or whatever it may be, and then we just that's when we tell them that if you're going to make that decision, you need to make that decision in the context of considering all these other things. So every client that comes to us, this is not the exact agenda, but this is essentially the agenda we use for planning for every client because we think you have to consider all this before you can make a decision on any of them, just because there's so much, they're intertwined so closely. And the other thing I was going to mention is the summary of the year-end plannings. That's in the beginning of the year, we say, "All right, this year, let's plan on what we need to do by the end of the year." When we meet with them on October 19th, we move that to the top of the list because we want to make sure if we need to get things implemented for the end of the year that we identify them sooner.
yeah, no, that's good. And obviously, it is that time of the year. And so it does become pretty important. As we get to some examples, tax laws change. And so we want to make sure that we take advantage of how those evolve over time. So, and it does. It's mostly clients come and say, I need help with retirement planning. And we're like, well, let's take a step back because other things may impact some of those decisions. So the one thing that we like to start with is a balance sheet. This is not my spreadsheet. Mine look much better than this, by the way. I don't use Calibri.
It was
as an
my
amateur.
spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's a bill spreadsheet for sure. Especially since, no, I'm kidding. But
Especially since it doesn't add up.
yeah, it doesn't add up on the bottom. We're hoping nobody notices that 11 plus this subtraction is not this number, but it looks good on paper, so that's how we make people feel better about themselves. No, I'm kidding.
And it
But-
made it through compliance.
and it
so-
made it through compliance somehow. They found other things, but not our typos or our math problems. So, but ultimately, why we go through this exercise is a couple things. And how does it relate to charitable planning is important as well. There's obviously a number of things that we can glean from a balance sheet. Things like, do we have adequate liquidity? How much exposure do we have to pre-tax IRAs? How much of your residence in conjunction with your other assets, are we sort of lopsided? So does Betty have more assets than Tom or vice versa? That may cause some estate tax issues that we want to address. Are there any other things that sort of stand out? Obviously, they have a really nice, 3 1/8 mortgage right there. So, if they came to us and said, we want to pay that off, we might try to convince them not to. But you get the idea that, from a comprehensive approach, just you saying, I want to donate to charity, I want to be more active in my participation is a hard thing to answer when we don't have all the information. And then the next step is to go through that same exercise just with your cash flows, right? And so this is actually just a sample case, just 5 years or so of just projected cash flows. From a tax planning perspective, we can glean a lot of things from this. Like, is there lumpiness in income or expenses that may present certain tax planning opportunities? Are required minimum distributions expected to come in the next few years, Social Security, things of that nature? So again, a lot of things that can help us sort of prescribe what we think is a more tax advantageous approach to donating to charity. And then the beneficiary designations, I think this is probably the most overlooked, obviously not within this group, I would assume, just because you're all clients, you have an estate planning attorney, which we appreciate you doing, because oftentimes we recommend clients to do it, and what do? They don't do it, right? And so they meet with us 2 years later, and we're like, where do you stand with your estate plan? And they're like, oh, we're getting to it, right? And we're like, well, when? And we will call Steve and get the time on the books tomorrow. But one of the most important things that is often overlooked or not looked at enough, I would say, are things like beneficiary designations. Even small things, when we're working with a new client, oftentimes you're like, you can't tell us too much. Like, don't hold back. Anything that's you might think is sort of immaterial, like, oh, I own shares of Duke Energy for my dad, or sitting at CompuShare, I'm like, well, what are they worth? They're like, she's like, maybe $1,200. And I'm like, well, how are they titled? She's like, I have no idea. Right? And so you might do all this estate planning work with Steve or another attorney, and then all of a sudden you just opened yourself up to potentially some hassles when it comes to estate settlement just because on something you thought was immaterial. And even like checking accounts, like if you own things in your individual name versus jointly with your spouse, like just getting something simple as, oh, this is not legal advice. I was supposed to say that, right? So, but best practices that we've heard from very competent attorneys are things like transfer on death or beneficiary or payable on death beneficiary designations. But the most important thing as it relates to charitable planning is if we have these, like you can see here, all these like pre-tax retirement accounts. So in this couple, in this example, you have a 401k, a 403b, and an IRA, all are pre-tax, which, you know, means you haven't paid tax on them yet, but what does the IRS want? Taxes, right? And so, well, they don't want taxes. They want to collect the taxes. But what we want to do is if you come to us and say, hey, we have some charitable intent, and a lot of that is at when we dock, because maybe we just want to make sure that our lifestyle is not compromised during retirement. We want to enjoy ourselves to the extent there's anything left over. We would like it to go to charity. Our kids are fine. Well, pre-tax retirement accounts, and we'll get into that a little bit, are some of the best assets to leave the charity at death. And so ultimately, if we have an idea as to, you know, where, obviously in this case, they have the donor advised fund. The DAF is donor advised fund. We'll get into some specifics later, but you can see that there's some opportunity there. It can also, and this is sort of a side note, but, you know, it's not charitably inclined, but it can also open up conversations around maybe potential beneficiaries that shouldn't receive assets outright, right? And so there may be some supportive needs of a child that has governmental assistance programs, but they don't want to receive retirement assets, or maybe there's some issues with substance abuse or spendthrift issues that there may be a better approach to making sure they're taken care of without giving them the outright exposure. Is that right? Yeah, perfect. So that's why this is important to go through the whole approach. So
And Dan, right, real quickly related to if you could flip back one, I'm sorry. So a real live case, prospective client in Easton, and I think this happens fairly commonly, is you know, your will or your revocable trust tends to be the device that has the positive provisions for your estate. And so in your will, you put, you know, I'd like a third to go to my local church or whatever organization, and the rest go to the children. And then you have an IRA account that has a spouse primary and my 3 children as equal beneficiaries. And what's missing there is that the children, if they were left assets outside of the retirement plan, would typically get a step up in basis, and when they got that asset, they wouldn't have to pay any tax on it. They could sell it immediately without any embedded gain in it. And then conversely, if you just took all the language related to charity to the extent it meets your needs out of your planning documents and just use your beneficiary designations, it's so much easier. And you don't have to. We would sometimes, like, if Robert didn't want to leave the 422, we would just make that 2 IRAs because he may just say, I'll only leave $400,000 to the charity. Oh, so I'm sorry. Yeah. So what I was explaining is if you don't want to leave the entire amount, we have the ability to split the account. And so for the last example where it's Robert's traditional IRA, it's $922,000, and Robert says, I just want to leave $400,000. What we'll do is open up another IRA, and we'll keep one account designated for the charity and the other account designated to whomever he wants, typically the kids. And actually, I think that's it. I had one more thought, but I couldn't think of it. So
that's okay. We're short on time anyway. No, I'm kidding.
I know her.
So I'm going to go through some food for thought and some things, just some largely related to charitable planning, but just some things that we sort of bring up in sort of our just sort of day-to-day with clients. As Bill sort of mentioned, you know, the 501c3 eligible charities obviously are not largely subject to income taxes, so that presents some opportunities, whether or not you itemize. As Bill had mentioned early on, you know, I'd say the majority of individuals are using the standard deduction, but to the extent that you itemize because of maybe the SALT deduction increases, might present some opportunities. Income in respect to decedent is, or we call it IRD taxes. That's effectively the taxes that those that inherit basically your retirement accounts largely are going to end up paying. With the Secure Act that came out, obviously 5 or 6 years ago, and then this new iteration, those that inherit a pre-tax IRA are required to take a distribution every year, but within 10 years, empty the full amount. And so if you have children that are hopefully very successful, that could push them into some unfavorable tax amounts that may present some opportunity for you to essentially prepay at a lower income tax rate. So it's something that we want to take into account. Cash is typically the least favorable asset to donate to charity. Obviously, we have the $2,000 cash donation that's available next year. But to the extent that we have an IRA or we have some appreciated assets, that becomes a benefit. There's some things we call bracket stacking or filling marginal brackets up, so we won't get into some specifics related to that. Qualified charitable distributions have been around for maybe 20 odd years or so. They are something that could go away at any point in time. But for those of you that are at 70.5 or older, you may not be able, if you're getting up to your required minimum distribution age, so 73 or 75, you have the ability to actually offset the required minimum distributions with direct cash donations from your IRA account to charity, and it reduces it dollar for dollar. So and it's above the line. So we'll get into some examples there. Donor advised funds are probably our most utilized charitable tool that we have out there. If you're not familiar with donor advised funds, it's effectively like sort of your personal charity where you can donate assets. It gives you some flexibility on things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but you can grant from that donor advised fund as you wish to the extent that it's an approved 501c3. And so for a lot of individuals that want to have some recognition, so it might be the Huffnell Charitable Fund or Huffnell Family Charitable Fund, when the charity receives it, that's what's written on the check. And then ultimately, if you do have an estate plan in place and charitable giving at death is something that's important to you, your charitable inclinations may change over time, but you don't have to necessarily update your estate documents. You can just change the beneficiaries of the donor advised fund and just name it within your estate documents. And then there's some other things that we'll get into as well as far as other tax planning. Required minimum distributions, I'm probably pretty sure everybody here is aware that the IRS does like to collect tax revenue on pre-tax retirement accounts. And so the rules have changed. So for those of you born in the 50s, your retirement age or R&D age is 73. For those of you born after 1960, that age is 75. But at that year, you are required to take out a certain proportion of your pre-tax retirement accounts every year, which offers some opportunity because one, your first year you take it's called your required beginning date. And so the year in which you turn 73 or 75, you actually have up until the April 1st of the following year to take your first R&D, which you have to take to the second year. So it's very limited, but there's some opportunity for clients that have a high income year, the first year of R&D, to go ahead and defer that potentially to a second year because they might be in a high income bracket this year. And then there's other estate planning and income tax related things, but I think we're going to probably cover most of them. Actually, number 19, I think this is going to become a little bit more prevalent and I think we're going to get in. I think there's going to be some coverage of the Maryland tax changes, but as Bill mentioned, Maryland is a great state if you have 3 young children in the public education system. So I appreciate everybody's hard-earned tax dollars. But it's becoming a little bit more costly to live here. And so there are some benefits if you donate to some permanent community foundations in this area. So, but the one thing that we wanted to mention is that I do say OBBBA, and I'm always afraid I say one too many or one few of the E's. I like OBA. So there are some implications related to OBA that impact charitable planning. One is what we talked about, is the fact that there may be fewer people, well, we don't know. It could be a mix, it could be a wash, but I think with the SALT income deductions, there may be more individuals itemizing, but when we look back the last few years, the majority of clients were taking, especially if they own their home outright and they didn't have mortgage, or they didn't have large medical expenses that are also an itemized deduction, we were seeing a lot of standard deduction. And what does that mean? That means if you donate to charity, it's not that you shouldn't, it's just that there's probably no immediate or any tax benefit associated with it, because you would have gotten it otherwise. So that sort of had some, I don't think that's really driven people to not donate to charity, but it's obviously will make giving to charity a little bit more attractive to the extent that more individuals are itemizing. Now we have that small above the line charitable donation, so a lot of tithing I think is going to end up having some income tax benefits. We mentioned the SALT cap increase. The other is the estate and gift changes. So the historically high federal estate tax exemption amount has made planning a little bit tricky for individuals, but a lot of like the more, I don't want to say esoteric, but more complicated trust planning that sort of satisfies two things. One, it can help mitigate estate taxes, but also satisfy charitable intent. It's sort of gone to the wayside just because it hasn't become as beneficial to clients, so the opportunity really isn't there. And so we may see that sort of continue as the estate tax is made permanently $15 million beginning next year. I like the permanent, right? Yeah, it's permanent until it's not, right? So some things to consider, this is a little bit of an overview. We're big fans of, there's a lot of benefit to donating appreciated security. So what do we mean by that? You bought something at $100 and a non-retirement account is now worth $200. It has appreciated $100. If you want to donate funds, and you're like, I'm going to donate cash, we wouldn't want you to sell the $200, pay income tax or capital gains tax on that $100, and then donate the cash. The charity's not paying the income taxes. Donate the $200, and then we can use cash on the side to buy the security that we had just donated. And now we've just foregone those realized capital gains forever. And so that's a really valuable tool. QCDs we talked about, donor advised funds, charitable remainder trust and leads trust. That's where that I say esoteric, but it's a little bit more of a complex trust planning. Private foundations we don't see a lot of, or charitable gift annuities, but they are available and they are utilized. So I think we wanted to go through and use this a little bit to go through some examples. And I know we're running short on time, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Billy has done a great job of trying to keep us on track. You just haven't listened to him, even though he's standing right here. So qualified charitable distribution. So I mentioned this earlier. So direct transfer from IRA to charity. So most custodians, for those of you that have IRAs, can issue a checkbook on the IRA. So if you're over the age of 70 and a half, and we can talk about maybe pushing it back to your actual retirement or RMD age if you're not there yet, but you can write a check directly to charity. So the donor advised funds are sort of on the way, so we're sort of ignoring those for a second. Up to $108,000 offsets your taxable income dollar per dollar. So effectively, if your required distributions were $108,000 and you wrote $108,000 directly to charity, that is non-taxable, whether you take the standard deduction or you itemize. And where that becomes important, and we're going to get, well, actually, we're going to get into that in a little bit. Jumping ahead there. That's how fast I'm going to go through this. Here we go. And we can't, and those checks don't go to your donor advised fund. They have to go directly to charity. So that's one of the downsides is, I think for those of you that are charitably inclined, is if you do a rather large donation to a charity, they're probably going to ask for that same amount the following year, the following year, the following, the following year, and the following year, and the following year. So, and then other charities that are comparable are going to be like, oh, they seem like they are charitably inclined. Let's jump on this charity train. So that's one of the downsides, is that it has to go directly to charity. Whereas the donor advised fund, you can sort of dole it out in small increments throughout time. So every year you can sort of manage those expectations. One of the techniques that, and we won't go through this too detailed, but one of the techniques that really highlights the flexibility of donor advised funds is a technique we like to call charitable bunching. And this year is actually a year where we've probably seen it probably the most, right? Just in anticipation of what's going to happen in 2026. But charitable bunching just means, let's say you're charitably inclined and, it's funny, we look at tax returns like doctors look at blood work. Like we can learn a lot about you just by going through your tax returns, right? And so if we notice that over the last 2 or 3 years, you're donating roughly $20,000 to $30,000 to charity every year, maybe through cash, maybe through appreciated securities, maybe a combination of the two, we may say, well, is your anticipation or your preference to continue doing that in the future? And typically they'll say, yeah, of course, why wouldn't it? And then we say, well, why don't we take the next 2 or 3 years, because this year you're going to get the best tax benefit, right? And so again, we're not doing this for taxes, but if we're going to do it anyway, we might as well have the government share it, right? And so instead of doling it out 20, 30 each year, let's fast forward let's just say, in this example, I think we use 25. So we'll use 75 this year, right? And so when we talked earlier about like a comprehensive approach, one, we want to make sure that that doesn't put you in an economic a place where you're not comfortable with. So if we've already sort of made sure that if you donated 75 and things sort of went awry in the future, no harm, no foul, but we can get the full benefit of this year. And the benefit of the donor advised fund is you don't have to donate the 75 this year. You can still do the 25 each subsequent year, but you get the immediate tax benefit in the year where it's the most beneficial for you. And in this example, we use 25. And so if you're donating 25, your standard deduction is 31.5, you're not getting any tax benefit that you weren't otherwise going to get. But if you get 75 in there, then you get the delta between the two as an additional deduction amount for itemized deduction. We good? Yep. So we will skip through charitable. So QCDs versus cash gifts. I think we sort of talked through this as well. QCDs are the best, I would say arguably the best tool for those that are charitably inclined or are also subject to required minimum distributions. For the most part, who's here on Medicare? All right. So, well, maybe but the government has sort of set the rate at which your Medicare premiums are, right? And then they look back 2 years ago and say, if you've crossed certain thresholds, your Medicare premium is going to be higher for that particular year. So it's a 2-year look back. So that's called IRMA. We're going to get into that here in a second. But QCDs, anything above the line helps mitigate IRMA. And I'm probably going to skip to that. Yeah, I think we have the IRMA in here. Nope. So I'll just use this as an example. So actually it's on the bottom right here. So IRMA stands for the income related monthly adjustment amount. So IRMA comes off a little bit better, right? It's probably the topic that's top of mind for most retirees, honestly, because when they end up getting their benefit statement for the year and then they see that their Medicare premiums are going up, they're wondering why, right? And the issue is these brackets aren't like a progressive bracket, right? If you're $1 over that IRMA bracket for the entire, 2 years from now, your entire year, your Medicare premiums could be $2,000 to $4,000 more, depending if you're married or filing single. And so that's it's one of the few times where I say there's no economic benefit to give it that one is, right? Because if you donate $20 and you bring your IRMA bracket down, then you're saving $2,000 just by giving $20 to charity. And we have clients where every year, this is the geek side of me, where we're trying to project where IRMA brackets are going to be 2 years from now and try to mitigate that exposure. Because that's the worst feeling is when you're $300 over that bracket and they have a whole year of higher Medicare premiums. We talked about bunching. This is a big one. I don't know. It's not going to be super prevalent because it is for those that are on the higher income earning side. In particular, we have one client that is very involved with the Genesee School up in, I think it's North Baltimore County. And he grants, he says he pledges, but we say it's a grant. He grants around $100,000 a year to the Genesee School. And that's for the next 4 or 5 years. Well, he makes considerable amounts of money. And so he's going to be absolutely impacted by both of these, right? The 35% cap and the 0.5% AGI for. And so we're going to do all that charitable giving this year. And it's probably going to save him, $14,000 on the low end as far as the difference. And then as Bill mentioned there, $4,300 there. So that was everybody just graduated tax planning 401. So I appreciate your patience. But we do want to highlight that, one, obviously charitable giving is important. You should do it regardless of what tax savings you may potentially get. But individuals like us are here to say, hey, if you're not opposed to the government sharing some of the economic cost of the tax benefit, there's ways of navigating it and making it as efficient as possible. So I guess based on time, do we just want to open up for
Yeah, there's a few things relative to one point on the Maryland, because there's several things I was going to point out, and that is we talked about the federal exemption amount, estate tax exemption amount going to $15 million. Maryland is not tied to that at all. It's $5 million. And so when we do planning and we have a client that's in that position, we still have to take into consideration some planning items to take care of the Maryland side. So I think I looked ahead at slides. I think we're going to cover that some more. And then let me just see. Yeah, that was it. The rest of this, I'll just stop right there. So do we have time for a little Q&A, or we just?
maybe two. One short wind. No, keep. Just saying.
Death of the owner.
That's a great question. So most custodians, so like Schwab Charitable, Vanguard Charitable, Fidelity Charity, allow really there's three options. One, you can specify number of charities of which it goes to automatically. Two, you can put in what's called a successor director. So oftentimes we'll have parents that have their children act in the granting capacity of the donor advised. Obviously, they don't have any economic benefit, but they have the options of granting out based on sort of either your desires or their desires, or a combination of the two. So we have clients that'll do 50% will go to these 3 or 4 charities, and the other half will have a successor director or 2 successor directors, which are oftentimes children. So
And one follow-up. And you donor advised for moving on or only
yeah, so you can have both of you as sort of the granting authority of the donor advised fund. That's oftentimes what we end up doing. Because if there is one spouse, something happens, then the other spouse can sort of take over based on their sort of preferences, and then it follows a successor route. So, and I have had a client with literally 8 charities and then like 4 or 5, so it can get as complex as you want. But it does make the estate planning process far simpler. If you do have like 8 charities, you don't want to name each one, and then one sort of irritates you, and you're like, "Hey, Steve, can you redraft my revocable trust to eliminate this one, or vice versa?" So, well, I just, yeah, never mind. Like that. Well, thanks
Well,
everybody. We
thank you
appreciate
all.
the opportunity.
Thank you all so
Bye.
much.
Thanks so much, Bill and Dan and Billy of Madera Wealth. So we're going to do some door prizes here for just a couple minutes. Then we'll have a short break, and then we'll jump into the rest. Liz and Barbara.
How's that? Good morning, everyone. Who's ready to win a prize? All right. Get your tickets out. And how this is going to work is we will put the ticket aside on the prize, and you can come up and claim it before you leave today. Okay? Oh, the first one is 056. Yay! All right. And that is the Maryland Scout basket. Oh, okay. The next one is, where's my list? Oh, sure. All right, Vanna. Come on, Vanna, get up there. It's a very cute little tote bag with all little Maryland scenes on it, filled with all kinds of goodies. And the descriptions are on your handouts that we gave you. All right. The next one. The next one is the McCutcheon. Did I say that correctly? Pantry basket. Okay. You got a number? Well, they have it in front of them. 101. Way in the back. Yay! Congratulations. Now the next we have a 2025-2026 season subscription to the Columbia Orchestra. 016. Congratulations. I'm going to do one more or two one? One more. Okay. We're going to do the Tea Lovers basket. Number 167. 167. Did I read that right? Yeah. No, maybe they stepped out.
They stepped out at the wrong time.
What happened?
They stepped out at the wrong time.
They stepped out at the wrong time. Jeffrey, should we pick another number then?
Definitely.
Okay. You snooze, yellows. There you go. All right. 269. Yeah, there you go. All right. All right.
So we'll take about a 10-minute break or so. Enjoy more food, visit the Alzheimer's Association table. Last chance for the charity raffle in the back, and we'll enjoy some more music from the Columbia Orchestra String Quartet. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
All right. We're going to do a few more prizes here. Here. We're going to do number 4, de-stress. Ooh, yeah. Who wants to be de-stressed? Number 71, you are de-stressed. They might be out, though. Okay, stay stressed. Okay.
Okay, now we're stressed.
All right, we'll try that again. Number 175. Yay! Thank you. All right, he was that there. What let's do number 5. Now we'll do self-care. What number you got there? 155.
Oh, my turn.
155, gotcha. All right.
Oh, no, that's it. We're confusing. Now we're going to do breakfast.
Now we'll do the breakfast basket for number 3. Where is number 3? No, okay. We'll pick again. So dramatic. Number 228. Oh, I heard a gasp, but I don't see it. There she is. I heard
On the
you
left.
before I saw you.
Congratulations.
Right here? Any more? You want me to finish them out? Okay. Oh. You want to take it now?
Okay.
Okay. Well, you can pick it up.
It is my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, who I've introduced hundreds of times over the years, Mr. Stephen Elville, President, Managing Principal, CEO, and Lead Attorney of Elville and Associates. Many of you know Steve well as clients through his countless workshops and webinars over the years. With 25 years of experience in elder law, estate planning, special needs planning, and much more, Steve has led this firm with passion, insight, and an unwavering commitment to client education. He has been named to the Maryland Super Lawyers list 10 times, including the past 9 consecutive years, and his leadership has helped Elville and Associates grow into one of Maryland's most respected planning firms. And through his guidance, our firm has become a trusted resource for thousands upon thousands of individuals and families, always staying true to our mission of education, counseling, and legal technical excellence. Steve, thank you so much for your tireless dedication to our clients, our community, and everyone here at the firm. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Elville.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.
Hello again, and how are you doing? Enough food? Okay, good. Let's hear it as they walk out for the Columbia Orchestra String Quartet. Thank you so much. And I have to tell you, I'm overwhelmed by your generosity and support, but I have to tell you right now, I don't know if I'm going to get through my presentation because I'm speechless right now. I'm speechless at Bill Huffnell and Madero Wealth's gift to the Elville Center and that guitar, which I can't even imagine how much it costs. And it's a flagship item now for our charity. So I just can't thank Bill enough. So let's hear it for Bill's wonderful donation. And I also have to say that I was referred a client by Bill about a year or two ago. And this was one of the first times I had directly worked with Bill. And he came in, and he doesn't know I'm going to say this, but he came in prepared like no other financial advisor I have ever worked with. I mean, and I've worked with some really good ones. He came in so prepared that I was astonished. It was almost like a complete estate planning package specifically for this client that we were getting ready to meet with. So I'm just amazed. Thank you again, Bill and Billy and Dan. Thank you so very much. Okay, as I get ready to get into my presentation, and you know sometimes we run long, I'll try to be efficient. I just wanted to recognize our audio-visual crew again, Drew, Dalton, and Olivia. Thank you for what you're doing today. And I know that they are, taking panoramic pictures of the room and getting you in the photographs and in the video, so thank you for allowing them to do that. And they've assured me that if you don't like the way you look, they'll use AI to make you look better. And they've assured me that they'll do it to make me look taller. Okay, and I also just want to say some of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be redundant. Some of you know I'm intentionally redundant. But this time it's going to be because I'm going to kind of go back over some of the material in just a small way that Dan and Bill presented. I'm also going to hit on some things that Lillian Hummel, who I'm very proud of. Lily is our elder law principal attorney in our Rockville office, and we're looking forward to Lily's presentation. And Lily is just a great leader, a great lawyer, and she really knows her stuff under the hood of some of the stuff she's going to be talking about that's so important. And the last thing I wanted to say as an opening remark is, Dan, you're not alone as a tax geek. And it's not me that I'm talking about. I'm talking about Professor Sam Donaldson, who is probably the nation's #1 estate planning tax geek. He's a professor at Georgia State University. And I'm going to encourage Dan to get in touch with Professor Donaldson, because Professor Donaldson has, according to what he says, 56 different colored sweater vests. Okay. So, some of you in the room will get that one. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill. And there are winners and losers. And most of us in this room are the winners. You know, the bill is very favorable, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on. For people who are doing estate planning, building their wealth, and so forth, the bill is very favorable, right? And for some of us who are on the elder law side as well, we know that the bill sometimes is a bit tenuous, and we're worried about it. We're worried about 2026. Lily is going to talk a lot about this in her presentation. We're going to talk about the people who are maybe not the winners in the bill, the people who are on needs-based public benefits, and what's going to happen to the Medicaid system in 2026. So we know there's two sides of this bill, winners and losers, but we're going to focus on the positive side this morning, at least in my presentation. But I'm a big believer in getting grounded before we get into the material. So if you don't mind just participating with me just a little bit, you are a very good audience. So Uncle Sam loves what? Taxes. But Uncle Sam also loves acronyms. So Dan said, hey, Steve, I like that OBA. So let's talk about this. Please repeat after me. One big. Oh, okay. Let's try that again. One big bodacious. Now, I've got my phone here. I'm using AI. One big bubbly bill. One big believable bill. One big bountiful bill. You get my point. So this bill is wild, okay? And we're going to talk about mostly the positive things. So I don't think we can call it a benevolent bill. But for those people who are doing estate planning, it's very positive. So one big, beautiful bill act, okay? OBA. Not OB3 or, Star Wars or anything like that. All right. Jeff, I'm looking for my clicker. Here we go. So thanks for playing along with me through that. So we're going to talk about OBA. All right. So obviously this is not legal advice, as Dan said. But we're going to talk about trends in contemporary planning. We're going to make sense of the modern estate planning tools in OBA. We're going to stay abreast of change. We're going to talk about flexibility. I'm going to be nautical this morning. I have my nautical tie on. So for those of you, how many of you have been out on a boat recently? Powerboat, sailboat. How many of you have been out on the ocean on a powerboat or sailboat? Okay. How many of you have been on a cruise ship? Okay, you guys have been out on the ocean. We're going to talk about the rudder and the emergency tiller. We're going to talk about IRA distributions to trusts. We're going to talk about the winners and losers a little bit. We talked about that just a minute ago. And we're going to talk about one of the most important things is the client care program, maintenance and updating. Okay. Let's talk about OBA. Bill talked about the 15 million basic exclusion amount, the BIA in 2026. So this is inflation based. So we got 15 million of exemption per person. We have 5 million of exemption in Maryland per person. So 10 million between a married couple. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. Let's just end the presentation right there. Oh, you mean there's something else to talk about? Okay. Well, all right. We'll go beyond the 15 million exemptions. We'll go beyond we'll go beyond all of that. So let's get into the income taxation side. So Bill mentioned and Dan mentioned the SALT deduction. So through creative planning, you can actually create additional SALT deductions. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're not going to be able to get into depth on these things, but I want to give you the general idea of what is available out there today. What is generally available in estate planning? So you could create additional SALT deductions by shifting income. How many of you have heard of the 199 Cap A deduction? Okay, this is where business owners can reduce taxable income by 20%. Some of you have heard about that, or you know people who are qualified for that. So you can create additional 199 Cap A deductions. One of the things that's amazing is qualified small business corporation expansion, where capital gain exclusion is increased from 10 million to 15 million. These are people who are doing startups, and the government is encouraging people to invest in startup businesses, and then pretty much you can exclude capital gain almost 100% on the sale of those businesses. So you can increase or create additional QSBS exclusion. So it's amazing for the winners on this bill. It's amazing what can be done. No tax on tips. Now, for those of you who really have read about this, there's going to be a tip jar out here for the lawyers because there's no tax on it. There's no tax. When you come to our office, there will be a tip jar on every table. Of course, I'm just kidding. How many of you have heard about the Trump accounts? Okay. All right. So doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you may be on. This is like an amazing thing for like IRAs for young people, right? So on July 4th, 2026, you'll be able to open a Trump account. Those of you who have loved ones with disabilities or have a disability yourself, the ABLE laws have been expanded now. We've been talking about this for years. You can be qualified for an ABLE account up to age 46. The annual exclusion from gift tax is $19,000. Opportunity zones. Now, many of you in this room are not going to be maybe investors in opportunity zones, but the laws and the incentives for people who are investing in opportunity zones, it's amazing stuff. And of course, Bill and Dan talked about charitable planning. Now, this is a chart. Bill and Dan talked about this. Bill, you're absolutely right that it's like $768,000 that a married couple can make prior to being in a 37% bracket. $640,000 in other, for single filers, $640,000. These are amazing things as far as taxable tax brackets. Now, look at this for many of you who have trusts and you're leaving trusts for disabled loved ones or people that need asset protection or creditor protection. Many of you now are somewhat surprised when you revisit this and you see that in 2026, any taxable income over $16,000 is going to be hit at 37%. So we have to remember, don't be shocked by that, learn how to manage the taxable income of a trust. So remember, if income taxation of a trust was not manageable, we would all be running for the hills, right? We wouldn't be using these kinds of trusts. So just take heart that you can learn about how to manage the tax ramifications of a trust where you are leaving assets in trust for a loved one or a spouse. Now, under OBA, we have to keep in mind, and I was talking to a couple of clients this morning, we can't always worry about everything, right? But a future administration, the exemption amounts could lower, and Bill mentioned that, so we have to keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit of tax science here, so if you get lost or you say, what am I doing here? You're normal. Just bear with me, all right? You may be a person in the future who creates an incomplete gift non-grantor trust. Talk about tax geek stuff. This is because if we create those kinds of trusts, we could increase our exemptions for SALT, 199A, and other purposes, and still get a step up in basis. So what are the tax gurus saying? And Dan alluded to this. We're living in an environment where, and Bill said this too, finding ways to increase basis, right? How can we get a step up in basis, okay? Well, we might do that through limited powers of appointment. If you don't understand this, at least you're getting this. And the gentleman here asked if these slides would be available, and the answer is yes. We're going to talk about downstream planning. Okay, how can I shift income to lower tier generations? How can I shift income down to my kids? Okay, that might be a strategy. How can I use a general power of appointment to shift assets upstream? Now, this is really a wild concept, right? If you've never thought about this, what if you have an older loved one who has a modest estate and you might leave them something and give them a general power of appointment over the assets? I know that sounds like rocket science on a Saturday morning, but basically using their exemption amount and they get a step up in basis. So there are ways of thinking about this, but there are risks involved. And I'm just trying to make you laugh, but what if you give grandmother a lot of assets and use her general power of appointment, and she uses that power of appointment and gives it to someone you wouldn't want her to give it to? So there's all kinds of non-tax reasons why we wouldn't necessarily do something like that. Um, a community property jurisdictions, so like Alaska, Tennessee, places like this, you could get the benefits of community property. Some of you in this room I know have community property, and you understand what the step up in basis advantages are of community property. But some of you don't have community property, and you might have an asset that you want to achieve a big step up in basis. Well, you could use Alaska law and you could achieve a step up in basis. So it's kind of hard to believe that this is the world we're living in, but it is the world we're living in for planning. Now, a lot of us would, and along the lines of what Dan and Bill were talking about this morning, unwinding a trust. And Bill, I don't know if you caught this or not, but Bill was really mentioning about what happens if we have a revocable living trust, and at the death of the grantor leaves a non-marital trust. And some of you know what that is. It's a bypass trust or a family trust or a credit shelter trust. Well, that trust doesn't get a second step up in basis, okay? So what if we wanted to undo that kind of trust? Well, you can undo it, but look at how cautious you probably need to be there. Well, there might be Medicaid issues. You're undoing a trust, okay, but you might be creating a Medicaid issue. You might be. There are general creditor issues. What if the person has creditors and you unwind a trust that is giving that person asset protection? What if that person is possibly going to have a divorce or incapacity issues? Or what about the trustee of that bypass trust? What if that trustee has fiduciary duty, which they do, and now because the trust was terminated, that person could be sued by someone? So you can't unwind these trusts without being very cautious, okay? Now, how many of you have heard of a spousal lifetime access trust? A SLAT, okay? I'm seeing some people raise their hands. Why would somebody create a SLAT since 2012? Well, what they might do is they might gift some of their assets into this trust, and those assets are frozen. This is for married people now. And those assets are frozen from estate tax forever, and they are grantor trusts, meaning you can have the best of all worlds. You can remove assets from your taxable estate, and you can still pay the tax on your own 1040. So many of these trusts were implemented up until just recently and still being implemented because people want to use their exemption amounts before the exemption amounts were going to what? Go away. But the exemption amounts did not go away, did they? And they just keep going up. So some of these slats might need to be undone, because do they get a second step up in basis? No, they don't get a step up in basis, because what is a slat? It's a fancy way of saying I'm creating a non-marital trust during lifetime. So a slat is no different than a credit shelter trust or a bypass trust during someone's life. But how do we get out of these trusts? Well, if we do want to get out of them, we might just distribute the assets to the spouse. But there could be all of these other issues, divorce issues, creditor issues, or we can decant the trust. One of our wonderful clients said to me just a few minutes ago, Steve, thank you very much for talking to me for 15 minutes and not mentioning the word decanting. And so I said, thank you very much. But how many of you know what decanting is? All right, so decanting, Jim says he knows. Decanting is the ability to substantially amend an existing trust. How many of you knew, and you may have to get another cup of coffee for this one, How many of you knew that an irrevocable trust is not irrevocable? All right, so if that didn't make any sense, you're normal. So in the law, we now can change irrevocable trusts if you didn't know that. And that may come as a great surprise and may even cause anxiety. But remember that this is the world we're living in. We have millions of irrevocable trusts, and these trusts can't be changed except by judicial modification in the past. But now the law has evolved. So I'm going to let you think about decanting or look it up or Google it. And when you do, you may be shocked that an irrevocable trust can be changed. But I'm very happy with the Maryland decanting law that we've had now for 2 years. And it has a big emphasis on, I will just say, common sense. Sarah von Stein Echeverria is our resident expert on decanting. So if you have questions about decanting, and Sarah is still in the office right now, she and I would be happy to talk about that. But just have the comfort and the idea in mind that your irrevocable trust that you leave for your spouse or your loved one, your disabled loved one, that can still be changed in positive ways. Now, are there states that have more outrageous decanting laws, like Nevada and places like that? And the answer is yes. But I'm very happy with the Maryland decanting law. You can substantially amend a trust or change it to a new trust within certain confines, and I think you'll be very happy with it when you learn about it. Now, again, we've got these existing credit shelter trusts. I got a little bit ahead of myself, but how would we change that? Well, how do we get the step up in basis back? Well, we might do a non-judicial settlement agreement. That's a mouthful. So that's, let's say, one step short of a decanting, where everybody agrees that the trust can be modified. So that's kind of an informal way, and it works sometimes and it doesn't. Give a spouse a general power of appointment. What is a general power of appointment? The spouse can give it to whoever they want, basically, including creditors. That's a general power of appointment. And if you have a general power of appointment over something, that means that it's taxable in your estate. And if it's taxable in your estate, you get a step up in basis at your death. Okay, so if you have a revocable trust, you have a general power of appointment over that trust. Okay, it's going to be taxable in your estate. So the more general powers of appointment we have, the more step up in basis we're going to get. And that's a very advantageous thing right now under OBA. But if we have a general power of appointment, can creditors get into the trust? Does anybody know the answer? So yes, when you give someone a general power of appointment, that person's creditors might be able to penetrate the trust. So we've got to be careful about general powers of appointment. So we have creditor protection issues. We need to use caution. And again, we could even use decanting to add a power of appointment. So that's a lot of stuff. And we've been talking about non-marital trusts. Non-marital trusts, like SLATs, give us a frozen assets for estate tax purposes. So if you left $1 million to a non-marital trust and the surviving spouse lived another 35 years and that grew to $10 million, all that money is estate tax free, okay? But it does not get a step up in basis. So that's what we're worried about. But some of you have marital trusts, not non-marital trusts. And these are sometimes called Q-tip trusts. So Uncle Sam has a sense of humor. And there's another acronym for you. So what do we have to be worried about if we have a Q-tip trust and you want to unwind that Q-tip trust? Now remember, a Q-tip trust gets a second step up in basis. So as we're talking about OBA and basis, you can get a second step up with it. So we don't need to unwind it. But what if we did unwind it? You might think, well, that's a great thing. My spouse, I wanted to protect assets from a remarriage. I wanted to give my surviving spouse asset protection. But now I'm okay if they want to unwind it someday. So whether you agree with that or not, let's say it's unwound. Well, when you read these, which you have to be pretty bored to read these, but if you read these, you're going to see that it's not as simple. Your beneficiaries, believe it or not, under these cases and these PLRs could be deemed to have made a gift to the surviving spouse, and that could trigger a gift tax. So when we unwind trust, the thing to remember about is you don't want to do it without really thinking through it. All right, Now we're going to get a little less technical. If you're still with me, feel free to get up and get some more food, get some coffee. I'm going to ask you how your flexibility is in your planning. Okay, so for those of you who are more nautical minded, or even those of you who are cruisers, I know a lot of you go on cruises. Okay, I'm going to ask, how's your ship? How's your ship? Your estate plan? How's your crew? You know, how are your fiduciaries, your personal representatives and trustees, and your selection? And when's the last time you thought about that? Okay, and are they educated? You're an educated group. You came out on a Saturday morning, and you've been very generous to come out. But how is your plan designed? What is your goal? Do you have trust protectors? Do you even know what a trust protector is? Are you a person that's comfortable with trust protectors? I have two or three clients right now that are not 100% comfortable with trust protectors, and they want to be very cautious about the trust protector's powers. But the reason I'm very proud of these clients is that they're really thinking through their planning. Personal representatives, the person who's going to be your executor, other special fiduciaries. And then I'm going to ask you, you know, are you familiar with the pressures that your estate plan could come under? So for those of you who are nautical, I was just talking to John, and he's a sailor, and he knows I'm a sailor, and we were talking about boats. And how many of you are familiar with what part of the boat, from my understanding, comes under the greatest pressure when you're out on the ocean? What is the part? John? The captain. The captain. All right, I agree with you. All right, well, do you want to come up? No, that's a great point. So my understanding is the rudder and the rudder mechanism on the boat is what comes under the greatest pressure when you're out on the deep ocean and you're in some high seas or whatever. So I'm just going to ask you, you know, when you look at your estate plan, you know, how deep is it? You know, how strong is your, and how many of you knew that if your rudder goes out, that on a sailboat there's an emergency tiller, right? Even if you have one of those big wheels and you're on one of these big fancy sailboats, there's an emergency tiller that if worse comes to worse, you have to grab that thing and mount it, and you have to steer your ship by an emergency tiller. So this is a serious thing if you're out on the ocean. So I'm going to just analogize your estate plan to this. You know, if push comes to shove, right? If there was a crisis, God forbid, I think in the last 2 months we had at least 6 or 7 crisis cases, which is kind of unusual. Like something horrible has happened. Somebody has had a health issue. At a time of crisis, you know, is your estate plan flexible? Is it updated? Because that's the first thing I ask. At time of crisis, like, does this person have a power of attorney? How broad is this power of attorney? What can we do? So we want to have strong documents. So, but now back to a little bit more of the more advanced issues. So we need to be aware that hopefully we have the flexibility in our documents, but we want to at least somewhat understand what a non-judicial settlement agreement is. I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, if we were having this meeting, there were no flexible approaches in Maryland law. Maryland law was really horrible. Power of attorney laws were horrible. And Maryland didn't get up to speed on its trust laws until 2014. And since then, the Estates and Trusts section of the bar has done a wonderful job of modernizing Maryland planning. So we have all these things, and if you're not familiar with these things, you should make yourself aware of it. Decanting, can we opt out of decanting? And some of you who are members of the Client Care Program, you may remember our presentation about 6 months ago. We talked about some of this, and you really can't opt out of certain things. And some states allow you to opt out and some states don't. So that brings up the issue, which, you know, Jeff, you'll have to put the hook up here if I'm going too long. Some states allow you to opt out of some of these things, and Maryland doesn't, and many states don't. Do you have a planning team? Do you have a financial advisory team that really advises you at a high level, and your CPA team? Do you know who your advocates would be, or your aging life care managers? We had Allison Stanton and Stanton Aging here last year. I just told a young lady who works for them that I probably refer 2 or 3 cases a week out to them. This is how prevalent the need for aging life care managers are. Memorandums of intent and letter of wishes. Do you need life insurance in your plan? Many of you are going to have large IRAs that are going to have accelerated income tax.
Are you going to use life insurance as a tool? I'm not saying you have to. Are you going to use that as a tool because there's going to be accelerated income tax to your beneficiaries, right? So there may be issues having to do with Maryland estate tax. So we live in the only state that has a state estate tax and an inheritance tax, right? Now, thank goodness, not everybody is subject to inheritance tax. So think about life insurance being the Swiss Army knife of estate planning, and do we need it? I just mentioned multi-jurisdictional opportunities. Some states you can do certain things, some states you can't. Those of you on the elder care side of things or have relatives that have elder care issues know that oftentimes we have to talk to people about going to Delaware for elder care because Delaware has more waiver programs. Now, on the flip side, let me give you an example. Let's say that you wanted to provide the greatest asset protection possible for your children or your nieces and nephews, and you said, Steve, how can I attain that? Well, when you die and you leave an asset in Maryland in trust, the asset protection is pretty good, depending on who the trustee is. Is it an interested person? Is it an independent person? Well, I was just talking to a trust company the other day that services a lot of financial advisory firms, and he was pointing out to me that when they serve as an independent trustee, because they are a South Dakota trust company, and I know a lot of you think this is like weird stuff, but it's commonplace now. Your child's trust or your niece or nephew's trust, if they were the independent trustee, they automatically change the jurisdiction to South Dakota, and South Dakota has the greatest asset protection of any state in the country, arguably. And there are 10 times more assets in South Dakota than any other asset protection state. But you can attain that kind of asset protection by understanding that the world we're living in today is multi-jurisdictional. All right, powers of appointment. We talked about downstream planning, upstream planning. How many of you have a letter of wishes attached to your trust? It's very easy to do. A lot of people are raising their hands. I'm very proud of those people. But just remember, you can design your informal wishes. You can also use a trust advisory committee. You could say, well, I want my trustee to have to be advised by 2 or 3 other people who are going to carry forth my wishes. What I want you to take away from this is we're living in a world where you can design your estate plan in tremendous detail. IRAs and distributions to trusts. So we have all kinds of issue here that we're not going to be able to get into because of time limitations. But how many of you have read an article maybe that you should never leave an IRA to a trust? Well, those articles are out there. And one of the reasons those articles are out there is because they say, oh my gosh, if you leave an IRA to a trust, it's going to cost 37% tax. And there's a lot of truth to that. So remember 2 things as we talk about this very briefly today. The Supreme Court ruled probably 20 years ago that when you leave an inherited IRA to a loved one, they do not have asset protection. So just remember that. You have asset protection, but your loved one does not, according to the Supreme Court. So if you leave the IRA to a trust, they will have asset protection. But now, because of the Secure Act, we have to say, oh boy, most healthy beneficiaries now have to pay tax in 10 years. So how are we going to deal with the taxation of an IRA in a trust? So it doesn't mean you should give up on the asset protection. It just means we should talk about how to deal with it, okay? IRAs payable to marital trusts, okay? IRAs payable to trusts for children and grandchildren. We just talked about that. IRAs payable to a disabled person. Well, we know that's going to be the easiest solution because they are exempt from the Secure Act. But a lot of us don't understand the difference between trust accounting income and fiduciary accounting income. And how do we think about leaving IRAs for spouses in trusts? And many of you are going to leave IRAs outright to spouses, and that's going to be the simplest thing. It's going to be the most efficient thing. But there's all kinds of sub-issues if we are leaving IRAs to trusts, especially for spouses in trust. Remember, if we have a trust and we have income in a trust, we have 65 days into the new year to get the income out of the trust, okay? And this is another concept that you should just understand. Bill mentioned this. And Dan mentioned this. IRAs are income in respect to a decedent. So that just means they're going to be taxed and they're going to be taxed like savings bonds and so forth. So these things are called IRD. And there's one special thing I want you to see right here. Even though 99% of people in this country are not subject to an estate tax, just like Bill said. I don't know why they just don't eliminate the estate tax altogether, but 99% of people right now are not going to pay an estate tax. But look at this 691C deduction, okay? Let's read this. If a federal estate tax is assessed on someone's estate, and remember, that doesn't happen too often these days, the decedent's estate is entitled to an income tax deduction for the estate tax that was attributable to the IRA. Now, that's a very big deal if you or someone you know is going to pay an estate tax. All right, so just remember that 691 deduction. There are wonderful charts out there. One of the tax gurus in estate planning that we follow is Robert Keebler. Robert Keebler is a CPA out of Wisconsin, of all places. He has some wonderful charts if you want to look at charts and understand what happens with regard to minimum distributions after someone dies. And remember, eligible designated beneficiaries, people who are not subject to the 10-year rule, are who? People who are less than 21 years old, meaning minors for purposes of the Secure Act, spouses, people who are less than 10 years younger than the plan participant, okay, chronically ill people, disabled people, and their special needs trust. So all these people are eligible designated beneficiaries, and they're not subject to the 10-year rule. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this has to do with IRAs into trusts. So we're going to, in the interest of time, just keep moving. We talked about spousal lifetime access trusts. Some of you may want to use an irrevocable trust for purposes of attaining some kind of a step up in basis. So again, we're able to exclude $30 million between a married couple, $15 million between a single person, and it's indexed for inflation. So that doesn't mean there's going to be an estate tax, but there are still opportunities to think in terms of removing assets from what? The Maryland taxable estate. So remember, we've got estate tax planning and we've got basis planning, but we live in Maryland. So the easiest way to eliminate your Maryland estate tax is to do what? Move. But we don't want you to move. We don't want you to move, but you could. So if you're not going to move, though, we have to realize that many of you are not going to have a federal estate tax, but you're going to have a state estate tax, and there are things to think about that we need to think about. All right, so I'm going to just keep going now. Life insurance trusts. If you buy a big life insurance policy to pay for Maryland estate tax, not federal necessarily, or the accelerated income tax under the Secure Act, would you just buy that life insurance and put it in your taxable estate? No, you would put it in a life insurance trust. So that, I'm just going to argue that life insurance trusts are still very, very valuable. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Some of you have cash that's sitting around and it's just earning interest, and maybe you would like to get that extra interest or investment income out of your estate. You can use a grantor retained annuity trust. Is the purpose of all this that you're going to remember all of this? No, but it's to let you know that these things are available, just to remind you. Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is arguably the most powerful tool in estate planning today. You can exclude assets from your Medicaid estate or your long-term care estate. You can still retain some control, and you can still get a step up in basis. So this is part of the discussion of basis planning. A Veterans Asset Protection Trust might allow you to do the same thing, but accelerate your benefits eligibility for the VA pension that you might be eligible for. Now, as I start to wrap up, and I know the ladies are here, Jeff's going to give me the rope here, or the pull thing here in just a second. Let's end by starting to talk about some things that we talked about at the client care program a few months ago. So as we enter into a world now where we have gone from, these are my words now, no flexibility to massive flexibility, okay, in estate planning. You need to be aware that things that you put into a place may not actually be written in stone. And this may cause you some consternation that my estate plan could be changed in the future by somebody. These new flexibility laws are off the charts. What is the risk to my planning? So I think it's just a healthy thing for you to be aware of what these tools are. Now, for example, this is not one of the necessarily those tools, but no contest clauses in your revocable trust or wills, generally these are not enforced across the country. But there is information available about how to think about this and how to bolster your no contest clause if you have a worry about a particular beneficiary, a child from another marriage, or someone else who's going to cause trouble for your trust or estate. Arbitration clauses. Only 5 states have really addressed this, but I hope what you take away from this is the estate planning world is continuing to evolve just like everybody else. Maryland has not addressed this issue. Videotaping, there's some risks, there's some rewards. This has been around for a long time. So Maryland does look at this in some ways in a positive way, but there are risks involved. Now, back to my original point. Trusts are not irrevocable necessarily, okay? So how do you ensure your wishes? How can you make sure you have the greatest asset protection? For example, if you wanted to avail yourself of South Dakota asset protection after your death, it doesn't sound like a logical thing, but this is the world that we're living in. Doesn't mean Maryland law is bad. It just means that some states have enhanced asset protection. So there's new modifications in the law over the last several years. How do you manage this? Well, you manage this through trust protectors, letters of wishes, decanting, understanding that, and just having educated fiduciaries and an educated advisory team. Choice of law, we just talked about that. What is the best jurisdiction? Okay. Trust protectors have been in the law since 2014. We talked about decanting. 23 states, as of a year ago, had decanting. Maryland got it on October 1st, 2023. If you haven't read an article about decanting, we have a presentation we did on it. You're welcome to look at that in our video library. So can you really limit the decanting? No. There's no carve out for it in Maryland law. So you need to be aware of the changes that could be made. Could you limit it or attempt to limit it? Yes, you could attempt to limit decanting, but in reality, you're not going to be able to do it 100%. Non-judicial settlement agreements cannot be limited. I'm going to move on just in the interest of time because they're going to give prizes here in just a moment. Directed trusts. This is a real opportunity for those of you, depending on who your broker-dealer is or your financial advisor. You may have certain choices to have a directed trust where you can take advantage of corporate independent trustees at a low cost. So remember, there are pros and cons of all kinds of choices with individual independent trustees, individual interested trustees, corporate independent trustees. This is all the part of updating and maintaining your plan. So as I wrap up, I always say, what is your goal? I know, Bill, the Huffnells and Maduro Wealth believe in that same thing. What is your goal? Does my goal in planning require future flexibility? Well, I would argue 95% of you are going to want that flexibility. But there's so much flexibility, I want you to understand what's out there and what if we just closed our eyes over the last 10 years, we would not even know that a lot of this has happened. So you need to educate yourself. Does my goal require that you try to restrict certain flexibility? So maybe it's a jurisdictional issue we would have to address. And remember that it may not be possible to restrict. Now, before I start to really close, remember, one of the big issues in this presentation is the idea that under OBA, okay, it's a very positive environment for planning, right? Not so much on the public benefit side, but on the positive side of planning, it's very, very good. So obtaining step up in basis, okay, because we have so much general estate tax exemption, except for the Maryland estate tax. We have so much exemption that we can focus on income tax planning and basis planning. So just remember, you may be a person who wants to shift income from your level down to another generational level, shifting income down into trusts for others, creating more exemption, creating more basis in other types of planning. As I start to wrap up, I want you to always remember, look at these fiduciaries: trustee selection, trust protectors, personal representatives, financial agents, healthcare agents, trust advisory committee members, your preferred financial advisors, your CPAs, aging life care managers, other special fiduciaries in other states like Delaware. So if you're not a member of our client care program, we strongly encourage you to stay in touch with us and stay abreast of change and also have some fun, as you see down here at the bottom. Our client care program members are fun. And if for no other reason, you should join our client care events so that you can hear Gary tell jokes, because he's very good. And we do get high alerts, right? Like the Corporate Transparency Act, right? Oh my gosh, Jeff started telegraphing our Corporate Transparency Act alerts several years ago, and it turned out to be nothing because it's been ruled unconstitutional. But these are the bombshells that come out of nowhere that you would need to know about. Legislative updates, family and fiduciary education, and again, how much flexibility do you want? And that's a different question, but that's an ongoing question. Jeff, you didn't pull me off the stage, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're going to finish up the prizes. Ooh, that was loud. All right.
Liz, you took
So-
the words right out of my
How
mouth.
are we doing? We're going to do the Caramel Lovers basket. And that is number 150. Oh, I heard another gas. 150. Okay, we'll have it up here for you. You want to take that on there? And we have another set of the Columbia Orchestra season subscription, and they sounded wonderful today. Great prize. 177. Okay, we'll have it up here for you, okay? Here you go. Yay. And we have the Ravens basket.
Ay, caramba. Ugh. The Ravens.
Okay, go Ravens. What do we got? I hope you're a fan, number 47. Oh, probably a Steelers fan. Let's move on.
Right here.
Oh, where is he? Oh, okay, we'll have it up for you. And I believe we're ready to pick the winner of the charity raffle. So if you bought a ticket, we will pull it right now. Right? No, pull one.
Liz, that's your red ticket, right?
Yep, red ticket.
Okay, let's see who it's going to be.
Make me shiver with anticipation over here. What do you got? The number is 866-8456. Yay! Congratulations. And this
Thank you for your support.
this concludes the prize section of the breakfast.
Congratulations to all of our winners, but because you're here, you're all winners to me. Who wants to take a half hour and talk about the Ravens and what's going wrong with the Ravens right now? I don't think we have enough time. It's terrible. It's a long season, though. Maybe too long this year. So our next presenter is Mr. Gary Greenwald, principal of the law offices of Gary Greenwald. Gary has practiced law in Maryland for more than 40 years. Sorry to say that, Gary. Focusing on estate planning, wills, trusts, estate settlement, probate, and business law, and more. He's an active member and twice past president of the Rotary Club of Columbia Town Center and a proud Paul Harris Fellow. Gary has been recognized on the Maryland Super Lawyers list for the past 6 years in estate planning, and along with Eldon Associates, his firm is only one of a handful of firms with a client care program accredited by the Client Care Academy in Boston. So please welcome Mr. Gary Greenwald.
Myślę, dowiedział, słyszałeś.
Good morning. I got to figure out which buttons to push and which buttons not to push. So we're going to discuss today a brief overview of the estate tax system and a brief history of the estate tax. What you need to know is that the estate tax basically assesses almost everything that you own when you die. The United States is a great country to live in, but it's an expensive place to die. as the same thing with the state of Maryland. Anything that you own, with certain exemptions, would be subject to the estate tax, whether you pass assets by way of a will or a trust with beneficiary designations such as a pay on death or a transfer on death designation. You have life insurance policies, retirement accounts, all those things would be subject to the estate tax. Now, in addition to the federal estate tax, here's a surprise. There are 12 states plus the District of Columbia that assesses its own estate tax. So take a look at the list on the screen. Do you see anything that looks common to all of them? Basically, they're either on the left coast or the right coast, except for Illinois and Minnesota. They're high-income states. I wonder why Maryland is highlighted. Let's find out in a second. You're surprised that California is not included as one of the states that assesses its own estate tax. It did until the year 2005. Then it was repealed. But up until then, California was also in a state that assessed its own estate tax. Now, there is not only an estate tax that you have to worry about, there's also something called an inheritance tax. So let's talk about the difference between the two. The inheritance tax is applied to assets that pass upon death to certain persons. That is to say, regardless of the size of the estate, if you pass assets upon death to certain people, there'll be an inheritance tax. The estate tax is based upon the entire value of all of the assets in your estate. It's not taxed specifically to individuals, but to all the beneficiaries with a couple of minor exceptions. Generally, throughout the country, and also with the federal estate tax, if you're leaving assets to a surviving spouse or to a charity, the estate tax and most likely the inheritance tax will not be assessed. There are 5 states that also assess an inheritance tax. Surprise. You see what Maryland, how it's highlighted? As Steve said earlier, Maryland is the only state in the country that assesses not only an estate tax of its own, but an inheritance tax of its own. Again, as I think Steve mentioned in his presentation, when clients ask me, how can we avoid the Maryland inheritance tax? You move. But you don't move to Kentucky, Nebraska, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania. Okay? Now, again, we talked about how Maryland is not only subject to the inheritance tax of its own, but the estate tax of its own. I think I'm pressing the wrong buttons here. There you go. So, is the inheritance tax in Maryland assessed upon all beneficiaries? The answer is no. If you leave something to a surviving spouse, or to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to stepchildren, to your parents, to your grandparents, to a charity, to individuals where the inheritance is less than $1,000, to brothers or sisters, and to registered domestic partners, which I'll talk about in a second. Regarding stepchildren, if you are in a second marriage and you leave assets to a stepson or a stepdaughter, no inheritance tax. Let's assume that you are married and you pass away and you leave assets to a stepchild, no inheritance tax. But let's assume now that the husband and wife get divorced. Those stepchildren are no longer stepchildren. So if you go through a divorce and you are you're leaving out your former spouse, which is a likelihood, but you like your former stepchildren, there will be the Maryland inheritance tax. A domestic partner in Maryland, a registered domestic partner, is not subject to the Maryland inheritance tax. What is a domestic partner? Whether it's a same-sex couple or a male or a female couple, that makes no difference, if you sign a declaration of partnership, and there are certain requirements we'll talk about in a second, and you register it with the Register of Wills in the county where you reside, and this is very important, you have to pay the $25 filing fee. If you pay the filing fee and you register that partnership agreement with the county in which you reside before you die, then assets that you leave to your domestic partner is not subject to the Maryland inheritance tax. The requirements for this domestic partnership agreement to qualify is that each partner has to be at least 18 years of age. They have to state under oath that they're in a committed, mutually interdependent relationship. They're not married to anybody else. And there is nothing in the law that would have prevented them from marrying if they chose to do so. Let's go back to the federal estate tax. I think all the speakers earlier this morning stated there's not a lot of people that are subject to the federal estate tax. So here on the schedule, you can see that in 2023, there were only 7,100 federal estate tax returns filed, and of them, only 4,000 of those returns resulted in an assessed estate tax. Obviously, we can't tell what the situation would be in 2024 because those returns due this year may not all be computed. The source of this was the Tax Policy Center. So the estate tax is really rarely assessed, at least unless you live in Maryland. Now, what are the current estate tax exemptions? Well, the federal estate tax exemption this year, if you were fortunate enough to die this year, is $13,990,000 per person, $27,980 per couple. As of when the new law was passed earlier this year, those exemptions were raised to $15 million a person and $30 million per couple. And this will be indexed for inflation. The Maryland exemption this year is $5 million per person and $10 million per couple. But here's what you need to know. The scuttlebutt within the Maryland legislature was that they were considering lowering the Maryland estate tax exemption. I heard rumors that they were considering lowering it to as little as $2 million or $1 million per person, $4 million or $2 million per couple. So when Steve mentioned just a few moments ago that life insurance trusts may come back into vogue, that might be a reason why. More than any other state, because of all the taxes we have when people pass away, it's an expensive place to live in, and it's an expensive place to die. Now, not everything that you own, let me rephrase that. When you take a look at your gross estate when you pass away, and what I mean by that is all the assets that might be subject to the estate tax, there are certain deductions that you can take. For example, on the federal return, if the estate had to pay a state estate tax, there's a deduction for that amount. If on the federal return you report a state inheritance tax, there would be a deduction for that. Funeral expenses, burial expenses, other miscellaneous expenses related to the settlement of your estate, such as attorney's fees, thank goodness, accounting fees, costs of getting appraisals of the property, all those types of things are deductions from the federal estate tax return. Now, if you leave assets to a surviving spouse, the likelihood is there'll be no estate tax. Not only if you leave assets directly to a spouse, but in a trust for the benefit of the spouse. We've talked earlier about these Q-tip trusts. I feel like this is a repetitive and redundant subject, but we'll talk about it very briefly for a second. So everything that you own when you pass away is subject to the estate tax. In addition, if you've given assets away within 3 years before you died, those assets are brought into your estate for estate tax purposes. If you've given assets to somebody else, but the gift was revocable, that is, you can change your mind later, that is included. That value of the gift is included in your estate tax return. If you own assets jointly with somebody else, for instance, you own property maybe with your brother or sister or somebody else, and you own it jointly with him or her, your proportionate value of those jointly owned assets are included in your estate for federal estate tax purposes. If a trust was created for your benefit, and as we mentioned earlier, you've been given something called a general power of appointment, which allows you in your trust to leave assets upon death to anybody you want, including your creditors, that value of the assets subject to the general power of appointment is included in your estate for estate tax purposes. Life insurance proceeds, if you have a $1 million life insurance policy and you own the policy and it pays upon your death, subject to the federal estate tax. Now, regarding the inheritance tax, and I said everything is subject to the inheritance tax, there is an exception in Maryland. Life insurance proceeds that are paid upon your death, not subject to the Maryland inheritance tax. But retirement accounts, thrift savings plans, 401ks, all those are subject to the Maryland the Maryland inheritance tax. And the question is, who is responsible for the payment of those taxes? That is the inheritance tax. And that all comes down to how your trust or how your wills are prepared. Because in those documents, you can either state that if there's an inheritance tax that is due, those who would be inheriting might be personally responsible for the taxes, or those taxes might be paid out of your residual estate. So when it comes to leaving assets, especially with the inheritance tax, you want to make sure that when the documents are being drafted, you consider, do you want the inheritance taxes to come off the top? Or do you want each person who would be otherwise subject to the inheritance tax to be responsible for those taxes? The unlimited marital deduction, again, allows you to leave assets to your surviving spouse, not subject to the estate tax. Here's a kicker, though. If your surviving spouse is not a U.S. citizen, the marital deduction does not apply, because Congress is concerned that if you leave assets to a surviving spouse who's not a citizen, he or she may leave the country. So there are limits. There is an exemption if you leave assets to a non-citizen, but the unlimited marital deduction will not apply. Now, you can leave assets in a trust for the benefit of a surviving spouse, and if certain conditions are met, the assets in that trust for the surviving spouse would not be subject to the estate tax. And here are what those requirements are. The trust must be established solely and exclusively for the use of the surviving spouse. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is that all of the income in that trust must be distributed to the surviving spouse. You can limit how the principal or the initial amount that passes into the marital trust is distributed, but the surviving spouse must be entitled as a matter of right to 100% of the income that is generated by the assets in the trust. And here's something that sounds a little technical, but the surviving spouse must also have the absolute right to demand of the trustee, whoever he or she or it may be, to convert any assets that are in the trust that are not producing income to income-producing property. So those are the basic technical requirements of a trust for the benefit of a surviving spouse. It's called a Q-tip trust. Again, we went over already the technical requirements of the trust, but the reason why these trusts are used is, number one, the principal in the trust can be exempt or protected from the creditors of the surviving spouse. Second, we can control how the principal will be distributed during the lifetime of the surviving spouse. Generally, we want to limit the distributions to health, education, or maintenance. Health and education, pretty straightforward. Either it's a tuition bill because you're taking a class at the community college or not. For health, either it's a doctor bill or not. It's not. The question really is, what does maintenance mean? And what I generally tell clients is, I'm not sure what it means, because there has been very little, if any, law, private letter rulings, code provisions that describe or identify what maintenance means. So I've told clients that as long as you are maintaining the same standard of living while he or she was alive, after he or she passed away, generally the IRS is not going to question that. Who might question it? Well, if there is a marital trust, the likelihood is that there are beneficiaries that will inherit what is left in the marital trust when the surviving spouse dies. And under Maryland law, remainder beneficiaries do have the right to request occasional accountings of the trust to make sure that the assets are being used according to the terms of the trust. So you may not have to answer to the IRS, but you may have to answer, well, possibly to your children, but more likely to stepchildren, children of the deceased spouse who died. That's sometimes where there may be a conflict in how these assets are distributed. And for that reason, if you think there might be a conflict, we may want to consider appointing a neutral third party as the trustee of the marital trust. QTIP stands for Qualified Terminal Interest Property, and that's because even though the trust is set up for the benefit of the surviving spouse, we are limiting to whom the assets might pass upon the death of the surviving spouse. One thing that occasionally clients will ask me to put into a marital trust is a freeze on distributions of principal if the surviving spouse remarries. So there's something for you, but I hate to say that attorneys by doing this are encouraging people in the future living in sin, but that's what the law is. Now, if you leave assets to a surviving spouse, that distribution qualifies for the unlimited marital deduction. And generally, automatically, if you leave assets either to a surviving spouse or into one of these QTIP trusts, that generally qualifies again for the marital deduction. But what happens if the marital deduction applies is that the estate tax exemption of the first spouse who died doesn't get used. Example, I leave all of my assets to my wife. Marital deduction applies. What happened to my $15 million federal exemption and my $5 million Maryland exemption? It didn't get used. So the question is, have we lost the ability, if we leave assets to a husband or wife upon death, of taking advantage of those exemptions? And the answer is not necessarily. Because previously, a few years ago, Congress and also Maryland as well passed a law which says that if you file a timely estate tax return and you make an election so that the surviving spouse gets to use the unused portion of the deceased spouse's exemption, the surviving spouse gets to use both. So even though, and it sounds counterintuitive, that there may never be an estate tax due because your assets are just below these exemption amounts, it is worthwhile to file the estate tax return for two reasons. Number one, so that the surviving spouse gets the use of both exemptions. And number two, if we leave assets in a trust, one of these QTIP trusts for a surviving spouse, we want to make sure that when the surviving spouse passes away, he or she gets this second step-up in basis. So we've talked about step-up in basis. Let me just explain what that is in case you might not know. If you buy if you buy an asset as an investment, and let's say you pay $100,000 for it, and 10 years later you sell it for $200,000, you have a $100,000 capital gain. If you bought that same investment property for $100,000, and when you die you still own it, but it's worth $200,000, the beneficiaries of your estate, if they want to sell this property, don't have to use your original $100,000 purchase price as the tax basis. That tax basis gets stepped up or increased to the date of death value of $200,000. So now, if you have greatly appreciated assets, when you pass away and you leave something to your husband or your wife or to children, you get this step up in basis. It saves possibly years of capital gain. Now let's assume husband dies first, because if you're a client of mine, you know that in my rules are the husbands are always the ones who die first, right? And I learned this the hard way. I'd rather have the husbands angry at me than the wives angry at me. So let's assume now we set up this QTIP trust for the benefit of the surviving spouse. I prepare an estate plan. We have this all set up, and 2 weeks later, husband dies. We set up this marital trust, and the husband was a young guy. Surviving spouse lives another 25 or 30 or 40 years with this marital trust set up. We could possibly eliminate 30 or 40 years of additional capital gain on the difference between what the step-up in basis was when the first spouse died and the value of the assets when the surviving spouse dies. So we can get a second step-up in basis to the date of death of the surviving spouse if we file an estate tax return and make the QTIP election. The assets in the marital trust are then, for estate tax purposes, considered assets that are owned by the survivor, and then the children will be very happy. Not that the surviving spouse died, but they get this extra step up in basis. We talked about the Portability Act, so let's keep going. What are the estate tax rates now? Well, the current federal estate tax rates are 18% to 40%, depending upon the value of your assets. In Maryland, it's 0.8% to 16%. Also, a graduated estate tax system, which means it's not 18% on everything. The first few $1,000s may be subject to 0.8%. The last $3 million may be subject to 16%. Let's talk about where did we get here? How do we get here with this estate tax? What I'd like to do is talk about very briefly the history of the estate tax. You remember your high school U.S. history? You remember the Stamp Act? The Stamp Act was in 1765, England imposed on the American colonies a very unpopular tax called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a device that was used to pay off the debt of England from fighting the 7 Years' War. Remember the expression, no taxation without representation? That was the original Stamp Act, and it assessed a tax on all written documents, including wills, that were written in the colonies. The tax was repealed in 1766. Well, guess what? The colonists learned all about how great this was. They passed their own Stamp Act in 1797. It was created to fund an undeclared war with France. It was a tax on stamps required for wills, letters of administration, and receipts of legacies. The cost of this tax was based upon the size of the legacy, or the amount that was being inherited. Good news for the colonists, the Stamp Act was not imposed if you were a widow, if you were a child or a grandchild of the person who died. It was repealed in 1802. The estate tax rates for the Stamp Act of 1797, you'll like this, was for bequests of $50 to $100, 25 cents. From $100 to $500, 50 cents. Each additional $500 inheritance was subject to $1. The estate tax exemption was $50. Next, we passed the Revenue Act of 1862 to help fund the Civil War. It was assessed on beneficiaries, not on the entire estate that a person left. Again, it was enacted to fund the Civil War. It was intended to serve as a succession tax. It was imposed, first of all, just on non-real estate assets. And then in 1864, Congress liked it so much, and they needed the money, they added also an inheritance of real estate. The tax rates ranged in the Revenue Act of 1862 from 0.75%. For all of you non-math whizzes, that's less than 1%, to as much as 5%, depending upon the relationship of the person who died to the person who was inheriting. Estate taxes to a surviving spouse, not subject to the Revenue Act of 1862. There was a 0.75% estate tax on inheritance to ancestors, lineal descendants, which means children, grandchildren, or brothers or sisters. A 3% tax was assessed on an inheritance received by an aunt, an uncle, or your cousins. Everybody else, the subject tax was 5%. It was repealed after the Civil War ended. Next time we passed it was to fund the War of 1898, the Spanish-American War. It was taxed only on personal property, which means anything other than real estate. It was a graduated tax. It was assessed at anywhere from 0.75% to 15% of the amount that was being inherited. The first $10,000 were exempt from the estate tax. So notice back in 1898, $10,000 exemption. In Maryland now it's $5 million a person. The feds, it's $15 million per person. So we have increased the exemptions over time. However, this tax was repealed in 1902. In 1916, we imposed the estate tax again. The Revenue Act of 1916 was really the genesis of what we have today. It was enacted to fund World War I. It was basically the first iteration of the modern estate tax. The estate tax rates were 10%. There was a $50,000 exemption. It was not only enacted to fund World War I, but also to try and prevent the concentration of wealth in certain families that had a lot of else back then. It's never been repealed. Well, wait a minute. It actually was very briefly. It was in effect in some form or another until 1916. But there was 1 year there was a glitch in the law, and that was in the year 2010. What happened was we passed an estate tax codification change that was good from the year 2000 to 2009. 2010, we couldn't agree on what to do, so there was 1 year, 2010, where if you didn't want to, the estate did not have to file or pay an estate tax. People who died in 2010 whose estates did not pay an estate tax, George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees. Dan, by the way, if you're an Oriole fan, that really just got on you. Dan Duncan, a billionaire who is a pipeline magnate from Houston, Texas. John Klug, a billionaire who is a media mogul. And Paul Millstone, a billionaire in New York City, a real estate magnate. Those estates did not pay an estate tax because they died in this 1 year in 2010. Now, if you died in 2010, what you really didn't have a choice. It was your personal representative who had the choice as to what to do. The personal representative could choose either to exempt the estate from the imposition of the estate tax, but forfeit the benefit of step-up in basis. Or they could choose to be subject to the estate tax that was going to go into effect in 2011, but retain the step-up in basis. Now here's the thing. If you owned a lot of highly appreciated assets, even though you would lose the step-up in basis, because those estates were so large, the accountants, the CPAs, the attorneys realized that it was more advantageous to not pay the estate tax, but swallow the capital gains exposure. So that's a brief history with as much minimal amount of legalese as possible that I could come up with. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, sir. See you in a few. Okay, how we all doing out there? Our next presenter today is Lily Hummel, principal attorney with Elville & Associates and leader of our Rockville office. Lily counsels individuals and families in elder law, special needs planning, estate planning, guardianship, and estate and trust administration. Her work includes helping clients navigate Medicaid eligibility, long-term care, and special needs trusts, always with compassion and excellence. But instead of me telling you myself, let me share just a few words directly from her clients. Quote, her knowledge of the intersection of Social Security benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, and private health insurance were a godsend. She conveyed complex processes in a way that was easy to understand and helped eliminate our anxiety so we can make informed decisions with confidence, unquote. Next, quote, I found Lily to be knowledgeable, honest, and kind-hearted with a strong human intelligence and sensitivity. She responded to every concern, anticipated our needs, and guided us through scenarios we hadn't even considered. Lucky are her clients. I have total trust in her, unquote, as do we. Lily, please come up.
Hi, good morning. Well, thank you, Jeff. That was a creative and lovely way to start. So I just want to start by saying this is a disclaimer, obviously not legal advice. And I am going to be going through sort of following up on Gary's historical review. And of course, I can't catch everything. So this is just intended to serve as a general overview. So I have to be honest, when I was asked to speak, I was really flattered, but I struggled more than usual to come up with what I wanted to talk about because it was hard for me to initially get my head around what do the people coming this morning want to hear about? What's going to interest the most number of attendees? The only thing I know about the attendees is that they like to learn, because if you're showing up at 8:30 in the morning on a beautiful fall day to watch some PowerPoint presentations about estate planning, you have a love of learning that I share with you. Just to help me get a sense of some of the interest in the room, Can you please raise your hand if your estate planning has any focus on special needs planning? Okay, so I'm getting at least a third of the room. All right. And can you please raise your hand if you have done your estate planning or reviewed it with an attorney in the last 5 years? Okay, so that's got to be like 90% of the room. Okay. And for those of you attending, how many times is this? Please raise your hand if this is your first time attending this event. That's a lot. Okay, great. Well, welcome. So for a bit of background to orient you about how I'm going about my presentation, I spent my first 10 years in DC as a policy person. I also have a master's in public affairs. And what I envisioned doing for my career was working as a policy wonk at the state or the federal level, and I focused on Medicare and Medicaid policy. So my orientation was always around policy analysis and implementation. But after about 10 years, I decided to do a career change into the special needs planning and elder law world, and I really see my practice as the intersection of estate planning and public benefits. The reason is because I really wanted to better understand how these policies are affecting people on the ground and how to better help them plan for it. So my presentation is going to actually zoom out, and we didn't arrange it this way, but I observed that each presenter, we started with our most technical presentation, and we've successfully zoomed out. And so mine is certainly going to be the 30,000-foot view, which if I were in your shoes, I think is the best way to arrange it, because by now I think some people's brains might be a little zapped with the review of IRC section, this and that. So I'm going to help provide some context around what the prior presenters were doing and help us understand where to go. To do that, I'm going to pick up with what Gary was doing and do some historical perspective. And then based on that historical perspective, if we can look at the past as a helpful indicator of what's to come, try to give some guidance from where I sit, from the trends I see from my clients and as a policy analyst about where we're going, and then how to adapt our estate planning. So I want to start on getting some perspective. And because I know there's some people in here who are probably very interested in the tax consequences when they're looking at their estate planning and their financial planning. There are others where tax is, of course, relevant, but frankly, they've come to this firm and to Steve and me and my colleagues because of the background on special needs. I'm really focusing on the most consequential tax law and the most consequential federal laws that have shaped our public benefits program. So I wanted to put this timeline together. I'd actually never done it before to see what does it look like? What are the trends telling us? So generally, roughly speaking, I put on the bottom row the most consequential federal tax laws that have shaped, are both as a result of how we have gathered our wealth and invested our funds, but also shape our estate planning. So in 1916, like Gary said, is the formation of the permanent estate tax that we have today. And that was probably both as a result of a need to raise revenue for World War I, but also as a result of significant concentrations of wealth coming out of the Industrial Revolution. For the first time, we had, beyond what this country had had before, a concentration of wealth that required, as a means of generating revenue, looking at the estate tax. If we continue along this bottom line, just looking at some of the tax trends that impact how we think about estate planning, we get to the implementation about 20 years later of the gift tax, then another less than 20 years later of the unlimited marital deduction. Fast forward 30 years, I think Congress caught on to people and realized that there were some loopholes in their planning by having an estate tax and a separate gift tax. You could just avoid estate tax by gifting everything away. So to avoid people to close those loopholes in 1976, we saw the unification of the estate tax and the gift tax exemption amounts. So that remains the tax structure we have today. In addition, we saw the generation skipping trust, the GST Tax Act come into play, again, to address some of the loopholes that were existing in our tax code as it relates to the transfer of wealth. And I'll fast forward a little just to say that in 2010, we, at the federal level, adopted portability as we know it today. And so that allowed a married couple, and I'm going to put this in sort of regular speak, not legal tax speak, but to combine a married couple's exemption amounts so that rather than, like, for example, in Maryland, each person has a $5 million exemption. If you combine it for a married couple, now you have a $10 million exemption. In short, if done properly, that's what portability allows for. So at the very highest possible level, leaving out lots of other important details, those are some of the major tax legislation in the 20th century that has informed our estate planning. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk about what's happened in the last 10 years. What really caught my eye from the public benefits side, for those of you interested in special needs, and I am going to wrap this around to really make the argument that you may think that public benefits changes are not so relevant to you and your goals, but I am going to talk about why they are further in the presentation. You see the establishment of the Social Security Act in 1935, but other than that, you really see some bunching in when we built the system that we have today. In the 60s through, I would say the mid 60s through the early 70s is when we saw the Medicare and Medicaid programs established. We saw a number of other programs that don't get as much lip service, but that are really vital to the way that a lot of our public benefits and supports work today. And then what we started to see in the 90s is, again, another cluster of activity. There's a number of things I could point to, but among them, in 1993, we saw OBRA, which was legislation that really codified, it really created the foundational statutory framework for special needs trusts to allow for the preservation of assets for people with disabilities, but to continue receiving public benefits. So it was a really important tool. It had existed, but this formalized it and really created more of the structure we know today. We also had in 1999 the landmark Supreme Court case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion, Olmstead, which really was, I think, the capstone of the activity we saw in the 90s, which was a recognition that there was a horrible practice of institutionalizing our fellow Americans who had disabilities and essentially warehousing them. And there had been a movement in the 80s and 90s to start moving away from that, but the legislation and the judicial activity we saw in the 90s was really what laid the foundation for what we have today to try to enable these people to live a life with dignity in our community. So just from a getting perspective on what affects our estate planning, both on the tax side and the transfer of wealth side, but as well for those of us that are focused on special needs planning, I think these are the most foundational pieces of legislation in the last century. Jumping forward then is what have we seen in the 21st century? Probably, honestly, what comes up most often for me is the ABLE account and the modifications that keep being made to that, but to enable another vehicle and perhaps a less onerous vehicle for people with disabilities to save money. I will say that the public health emergency of the early 20s of this century really kind of mucked us all up. So it's hard to even comment from a legislative perspective. It was a very unique point in time, and we're getting back to figuring out now what is our new normal. And I'm going to talk in just a minute about what I perceive to be that new normal. And then on the tax side, which I try to sort of put at the bottom, I think some of the more consequential pieces of legislation we've seen in the last 15 years the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which laid the foundation for doubling the federal estate tax exemption amount. The Secure Act, which impacted how the withdrawal process, the required minimum distributions for your pre-tax retirement accounts, especially if they're inherited accounts. I think that has really significantly started to affect how we think about our investments, because these accounts do have a lot more strings attached to them with what we can do for planning purposes. So the advice that everybody got through the 90s and early aughts to max out your 401k and all of that made a lot of sense. And now I see people who they took that good advice. They have a $4 million IRA, and they realize that their RMDs are insane and that their children who are doing very well are going to inherit IRAs that they have to withdraw from in 10 years. And a lot of that good savings they did is not fully recognized because of the income tax bracket structure. So it'll be really interesting to see for CFAs and estate planning attorneys how the Secure Act, and are now seeing, I think, the first generation of people with 7-figure pre-tax retirement accounts, how that might shift our retirement strategies going forward. And then we have the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which continues to make modifications to the tax structure, which kind of gets me to what are some of the themes. So in the Let's Get Perspective, what have we seen historically to help us predict where these policies are going and how we can change our estate plan? What are some of the themes I'm seeing both in the legislation, but then in my office and in the seminars that I'm attending? What I'm seeing is ongoing tinkering with the tax code. I think for folks in this room, you're well positioned. It's something we have to keep up with. There are material changes to the tax code that are affecting all different sorts of planning, from capital gains and what's the basis to the income tax brackets. What are options to minimize the income tax on inherited IRAs? These are all questions now that are really coming to the fore. And I think we're going to continue to change. I don't know if we're going to see any I'm not hearing a big new landmark legislation like when they established the unlimited marital deduction. That's a seismic shift, right? Establishing a gift tax is a seismic shift. I would argue doubling the estate tax exemption amount is important. That's big news. I wouldn't say that's a seismic shift. I don't know that we're in an era of policy tax making now because of the gridlock, that we're going to see seismic shifts in the laws themselves. But I do think we're going to continue to see a lot of important modifications of the laws that are going to require regular education. On the public benefits side, my observation is we are in an era of retrenchment, and I would say that the benefits are being pulled back in two very important ways. One way that we're seeing retrenchment is who can access the benefits, just baseline benefits eligibility. How do you get access to the benefit, right? The second way, though, is for those who are eligible, what do they actually get in that benefits package? Those are two different ways that a policy can change. Do I think Medicare will be repealed? Of course not. Do I think your Social Security retirement is going to be repealed? No, I do not. Do I think for those of us that are doing special needs planning, do I think that the community pathways waiver is going to be eliminated? No, I do not. Do I think that access is going to get a lot harder? Yes, I do. Do I think that for the generation behind your children who are going to be entering into the waiver system, they're going to find a less generous benefits package? Yes, I do. So those are the kinds of things that we need to plan for. Legislative and regulatory gridlock. We're on day 18 of the government shutdown. The shutdown itself has become pretty standard practice. When I work for the Fed, I got a 2-week paid holiday that I didn't want. So it's not that the gridlock itself is new in this exact political era. But I think a lot of the changes to the rules in Congress and the way that things are working now, it's going to be a lot harder to get landmark legislation through. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was an exception to that. They got real legislation through. The regulatory gridlock I'm going to talk about later, though, is really significant, and I think an under-discussed point of what's going to affect us in our real lives. I'm also going to talk about what's going on with state budget, because for Marylanders, that is going to be a very consequential consideration, especially for those of us looking at public benefits. The last thing I'm going to say about where are we now is, as we're all living longer lives and we have these advancements in medical treatment, so that whether it's a neurological decline, a physical decline, whatever the prognosis is, we can physically live longer, if not better, we can live longer. Who's going to help manage affairs if you're unwell? We have smaller families. Less people have children. Children are moving away and doing their own thing. They're not available to be your fiduciary. We don't have a built-out system in Maryland for professional fiduciaries. We may have to develop more of one. Who can be your professional financial power of attorney? Because there's not a lot of professionals to serve in those roles. And yet, it's a fairly common theme in my office. I don't know who to ask to serve in these roles. So the question about who can be your fiduciary is a really important one. So now we're going to start transitioning into, what does this historical perspective tell us? So I'm going to use Medicaid as an example. And so in our transition, I'm going to do a review of what we all hopefully learned in civics class. So at the federal level for policymaking, we have 3 branches of government. At least the textbooks when I went to school said 3 equal branches of government. And I'm going to walk through, as a concrete example, what those 3 branches do. I'm going to use Medicaid as my example. So 1965, with Lyndon B. Johnson as president, Congress approved an law that established the Medicaid program. That is part of our legislative system. Now, it requires the president to sign it. That's the executive branch. But usually if Congress passes it, it's rare that a major signature piece of legislation is going to get passed by Congress without knowing that the president will sign it. People think of the executive branch as the president, but I can tell you as a policy person, I view the regulatory body under them as equally, if not more important. Those are the people who have dedicated their lives to becoming experts on very niche areas of law, policy, and then implementing what it is that Congress put into law. They are the people doing the rulemaking process. They are people who have a master's in public affairs or other specialized education, and they sit in the executive branch and report up through to the president. So Medicaid has tens of thousands of pages of rulemaking over the last 60 years that have been promulgated by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's the name of the federal agency that reports up to the executive branch to the president. If there is a perception amongst the public that the executive branch or the legislative branch have overstepped in some way, the check and balance is supposed to be the judiciary. We can file something in court and try to push back on what we think is an overstep. So a good example was the challenge to the Affordable Care Act in 2010. So there was a challenge that this law went too far. It tried to authorize things that were outside of the appropriate purview of either the executive or the legislative branch. That's an example of where the judiciary stepped in and weighed in on the Medicaid program, and at the time protected the subsidies that have helped to expand Medicaid. Okay, so that is the branches of government. And then we look at federalism. Federalism is the interplay between the federal, the state, and the local government. What's really complicated about Medicaid specifically is that we use this word as if it's a singular thing. But Medicaid is actually a series of programs, dozens of programs that are all rolled up under the umbrella term Medicaid. It doesn't mean just one program. Medicaid covers more than a quarter of health insurance for children in America. So it's just their health insurer. They get health insurance through Medicaid. Medicaid covers low-income working adults, pregnant women, but Medicaid is also the program that covers nursing home care. And through legislative enactments in the 80s, we now have the waiver system. We're waiving out of institutionalized care and allowing people with disabilities to receive services at home that are paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. The federal government puts in place the framework, and then the states adapt it. And it is materially different state to state. That's why Steve mentioned if you need Medicaid long-term care, we may have to go look at Delaware because the rules in Delaware are really different from Maryland, and they're different in Maryland from DC. So there's the federal, the state, and then there's even a role to play for the local government with Medicaid. The county health department can be involved in doing level of care assessments. I live in Montgomery County. Our Department of Health actually does the Medicaid application assessments for long-term care applications. So that's just one example of how, in theory, all of these different elements come together to affect policy. And then what do you see? You say, well, I live in Rockville, Maryland. My mother has progressive Alzheimer's and doesn't have enough money to pay for memory care. What do? I'm going to need to help her apply for medical assistance, that's Medicaid, long-term care. Then I'm looking through how all these wheels are grinding together to get to the end result of an application where my mother can have Medicaid paid for by both the state and the federal government receive coverage in a nursing home. So then briefly, what can we expect? What does this mean going forward? At the federal level, we all know that there are massive layoffs underway and more expected. So even if the public benefit piece feels irrelevant to you, you should be aware, for example, at the IRS, 25% of the staff took early retirement and another 1,000 people were laid off last week. So I think you should expect some long wait times. And if us in the estate planning community are looking for novel estate planning approaches and we want to request a private letter ruling to get sort of a blessing on some kind of new arrangement to expand and move forward our estate planning field, well, I think we should expect a pretty long wait for that private letter ruling in this current environment. So I think what we're going to see is the impact of the staffing at the federal level. Like I said, ongoing tinkering of tax code. Medicaid, it's a bit TBD. A lot of the changes proposed in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are scheduled to go into effect after the next midterm election. But what I will say is that the rollback of other benefit programs like food stamps, for example, which isn't actually called food stamps, but that's how people know it. The way that a lot of these programs are structured is they share resources in IT and staff and infrastructure. So by rolling back a lot of other programs, there are going to be ripple effects to programs that on paper are seemingly unrelated. So it's a bit to be determined at the federal level, but I think we're going to continue to see for the next couple years attempts to scale back the programs, which could also, depending on how you want to really view it, as attempts to improve the integrity of the program and to get it back to its original purpose in 1965. Medicare. All right, so this is also one where I think the impacts are going to depend on your vantage point. What am I hearing? I'm hearing Medicare Advantage. They are rolling back PPOs. They're moving. If you don't see it this year, we're entering open enrollment season. You're going to see it next year. You may get grandfathered in, but going forward, there's private plans are not going to be offering PPOs. They're going to move to an HMO locked-in network system. And on the original Medicare side, we're seeing substantial rate increases for supplemental Medicare programs. You could argue that is a market correction, and you could argue that that is the result of the incredible instability in the health insurance market as a result of what we're seeing on the Medicaid side. So potatoes, however you see it, that's what's happening out there in the real world. And for retiree benefits, Social Security, I think for those of us that have not yet started receiving Social Security retirement, we can expect them to continue making small changes that might push back when we can receive benefits or full retirement age. I think people that have already elected, I think it's very unlikely there'll be a rollback of their benefits, but I think for people who are millennials and young Gen X, they would be well advised to consider not that the program's going to disappear, but that it will roll back in some way. Again, how does this affect our planning? Maryland. Dudes, we got to balance our budget, but we actually have to balance it. There's only two levers: cuts and more revenue. There are no other levers, right? So what did they do last year? I mean, legislatively, what they did was very predictable. They raised taxes. They have to generate revenue. And they made as many cuts as Marylanders could stomach. There were some pretty difficult cuts proposed for DDA and the waiver system. We were fortunate to fend a number of them off, but I think from a revenue standpoint, we can expect those proposed cuts to continue. It won't be until January until we know whether Maryland continues to face the level of shortfall that we did last winter. But if you just look at it from the standpoint of thousands of Marylanders losing their job and claiming unemployment benefits, as one example, and no longer paying income taxes, just from that example alone, I think the writing is on the wall about where our budget is likely to land this winter, but we'll see. The state is going to have no choice but to try to hold the line on their expenses. Maryland Fast Facts. If you are a policy person, I really recommend Kaiser Family Foundation. They have really, really interesting data if you're interested in data. The facts, one thing that often comes up for people in the Medicaid world is this differential right here. 9% of enrollees in Maryland Medicaid have a disability. They're receiving benefits as part of the disability community. But that accounts for almost a third of the spend. There's similar statistics on the long-term care side about the number of seniors enrolled versus the spend on long-term care. And this graph is greatly exaggerated, even more so on the federal level. So you can see why, from a budget perspective, when Medicaid is a significant portion of Maryland's budget, and within that, the bars don't line up, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's very reasonable, but it also helps explain why there's just, I can't defend it, but I can say if I'm just going to look at the numbers and come in with a calculator, I'm going to say, oh, well, if the children are 35% of the enrollees, shouldn't they be 35% of the expenditures? Well, if people with disabilities are 9% of the enrollees, shouldn't they just be 9% of the expenditures? So if I just want to take a math approach, this chart's a problem for the special needs community. So, what do we do from an estate planning perspective? Our presenters today, what can we help you think through? Now, I am very happy to say a lot of what I'm about to say is in various ways already been discussed today, which means you're getting consistent advice, because I will say personally, it really stresses me out when I go to see a couple specialists and they all give me different advice. So the good news is we are all speaking the same language in terms of what the key takeaways are for you today. I think it's pretty evident that the people sitting here today want you to understand that estate planning is not a set of documents. That is a component, but when I say estate planning, that is absolutely not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the big picture, and I'm going to have a slide in a minute. I guess I'll come back to it. The big picture where you're building your team personally and professionally. And as Steve said, I liked his analogy. I wish I could carry it forward, but you're building your team and you're regularly evaluating your team, because the situation of your children or your nieces and nephews or your family change. Their availability changes. Your assets change, both the amount of them, but also how they're allocated between real estate, pre-tax retirement incomes, something with really low basis, something with really high basis. All of these things change. So we need to keep making sure we have the right professionals and loved ones plugged in. I've found myself more and more saying to my clients have been coming in very anxious lately, and that's probably in part because my professional focus tends to be on special needs and elder law, and there's a lot to be anxious about there. One thing I've been saying more and more is, let's just look at this as your 5-year plan. I think it is too much and unrealistic pressure to put on yourself to say this is going to be the plan. Maybe it will be fine, but let's take a bite-sized chunk, what we know now, and consider what makes sense based on the inputs I have now for the next 5 years. And I'll commit to re-reviewing in 5 years. The communication component is key. There is no central repository of your values, your assets, what you have planned, except in your head, unless you write it down or you tell it to people. And if you are unfortunately in a situation where you're navigating family dynamics that are problematic or concerning to you, I really do urge my clients, the more that you can communicate what your plans are and why, the more you can do your part to help prevent the communication breakdown in the future, because it reduces surprise and it makes it clear this is what you want and why, so that it's not left to the next generation to try to figure out. And then last, as Steve talked a lot about, he had great examples of flexibility. Where can you build in flexibility into your estate plan? One of the most basic ones that I like my clients to think about, this isn't the right one for everyone, so I'm not saying you should do this. But did you know in your financial power of attorney, you can give your successor agent the authority to select another agent? So let's say your spouse is your agent and your eldest daughter, because it's always the eldest daughter, your eldest daughter is your successor agent. Did you give that daughter the authority to name someone else in case you never revisit the document and life evolves and she can't do it? It's just, the answer may be that's not a good fit in my family, and that's fine. But that's the kind of flexibility I'm talking about. The last thing I'll just say as a homeowner, just like remodeling, this is going to take longer than you expect it will. Listening to Steve go through his presentation, there's a lot to digest there. So give yourself some time. This is at least a several month process involving the team, right? So it's not going to be a meeting or two. A lot of people talked about goals. And so the thing I want to emphasize about goals, and this is part of the 5-year taking a bite-sized chunk. One of the more interesting things in doing this work that I've noticed is that very rational, logical people have different goals. I did not know that. I have clients that say with a completely straight face they do not care about charitable giving. And I have other clients, they can't sleep at night because they're so wrapped up in, they feel they have this burden and this honor. They have received a sizable inheritance in how to create a charitable giving plan that honors that inheritance. Very rational on both sides, but very different goals. And the last thing I'll say about the goals that I have to challenge some of my clients, it's not just what are your goals, but if I wanted you to force rank them, how would you rank your goals? Because we can't always achieve 100% of all goals. And so we have to be realistic about some trade-offs, and that's something that your attorney, your accountant, your financial advisor, and your loved ones can help you do. But I do think that sometimes we need to be honest about what goal is it that's most important to us, and then what goals can we settle for achieving 50% of it. It's not to say it's off the table, but to say, if equity is the I want equal distributions across all 3 kids, and that is the most important thing, even though if I did it differently, there'd be a more advantageous tax outcome. But both actual or the appearance of equity is the most important thing, then we're going to do a third, even if you left the whole IRA to the special needs trust, because it would get a more favorable tax income treatment. So neither's better than the other. It's just acknowledging that it's sometimes disappointing, but also you've done your due diligence because you thought it through and you came to a conclusion about accepting the trade-offs as they exist under our current set of rules. And so with that, I think we're right about at time. Very close. I'll wrap up. Thank you all very much.
Lily, thank you. So very powerful. Gary, do you want to come on up and close us off here?
We did this, can you hear me in the back? I think we did this the last time we had a CCP event. I'm going to present to you 6 or 7 different situations. I'm going to go over some strange laws that we find in the United States if we look closely enough. So the first one of these laws is not a real law. 2 of them are. Well, I think last time we did this, Steve, you were involved, didn't you? I asked you what you thought was the real laws and which one wasn't. All right, come on up here.
He said he wanted to do that. Oh, yeah, Billy.
And I will say this. Before I actually put these together, I did do some research to confirm which were real laws and which were not. So, Steve, of these, is it up there? There it is. Of these 3, we got number 1. Is it illegal in Massachusetts? Nope. I see. This is not lined up with the other. Let's try this. All right. 3 potential laws. It is illegal in Massachusetts for a state licensed gun club to sell a target that resembles a person. Next, it is illegal in Georgia to wear suspenders made of cloth. Next, it is illegal in Kansas for a mother without a cosmetology license to give a perm to her daughter. 2 of these are real laws, 1 is not. Which do you think is not a law?
I'm going to choose B.
Steve chooses B. Who agrees with Steve? All right. Who thinks A is not a real law? Not too many. Who thinks C is not a law? The answer I got to tell you is we're playing Stump to Steve. He got it right. All right? Of these 3 laws, 1 of them is not a real law. Number 1, it is illegal in Butte, Montana to chew tobacco inside a public building. Number 2, it is illegal in some towns in Texas to dig through your neighbor's trash to find food. Number 3, that's my favorite. It is illegal in Austin, Texas to carry a concealed wire cutter. So 1 of these is not a real law. Steve, what do you think?
This one's not good. I'm going to say C.
Steve thinks that it's not illegal in Texas, in Austin, Texas. Actually, it is illegal in Texas. All right. It started from about 150 years ago when people were stealing cattle from each other. All right. Who thinks A is not a real law? A couple. All right. Who thinks B is not a law? All right. The answer is A. It is not illegal in Butte, Montana to chew tobacco inside a public building. You got to remember it's Montana. All right. Of these 3 laws, 1 of them is not real. A. In Florida, it is illegal to drive cattle onto railroad tracks. B. It is illegal in Wyoming to sing to cattle during daylight hours. And C. It is illegal in New Jersey to pump your own gas at a gas station. Yeah, so people have driven on the turnpike, right? All right, so that means either A or B is not a real law. So Steve, of those first 2, what do you think is not real law? A, Steve thinks it is not illegal to drive cattle onto railroad tracks. It actually is illegal in Florida to do that. The fake law is B. Next, here are the 4 choices. It is illegal in Alaska to whisper into a person's ear while moose hunting. B, it is illegal in Oklahoma for a person to take a bite out of another person's hamburger without permission. And C, in Lincoln, Nebraska, it is illegal to fall asleep in public with your shoes on. By the way, has anybody ever been in Lincoln, Nebraska? Well, I have, and this happens all the time. All right, so Steve, of these 3, which do you think is not a law?
I have a question for you. Is this really happening?
It is.
I'm going to say A is not a law.
All right, well, guess what? It's illegal to whisper into somebody's ear while moose hunting in Alaska. It is illegal in Oklahoma to take a bite out of somebody's hamburger without permission. But in Nebraska, you can sleep with your shoes on. I've done it. All right, number 5. It is illegal in Carmel by the Sea, California, to wear high heels without a permit. B, I always try to get one in Maryland. It is illegal in Baltimore, Maryland, to wear a sleeveless shirt in public. And C, it is illegal in Arkansas to use obscene language in a place of religious worship. So Steve, of these 3, which do you think is not a law?
C.
Steve thinks C. Who else believes it's C? A couple people. All right, who believes that B is not? Okay, that's pretty good. And A, it's illegal to wear high heels. Ladies, I'm sorry, it is illegal to wear high heels in California without a permit. It's C. C is not a real law. All right, we're almost done. First, it is illegal in Tulsa, Oklahoma to ride a horse facing backwards if you don't have a saddle on it. B, it is illegal in the state of Washington for a person who knows he or she has a cold to stand close to somebody else. And C, it is illegal in Boston, Massachusetts to post an advertisement above a public urinal. So Steve, of these 3, which do you think is not a law? He thinks it's not illegal. Okay. Anybody agree with Steve? Eh? See, I know what you're doing. You're trying to think of the most ridiculous one, and you're figuring it is okay. Who believes that it is illegal in the state of Washington for a person who knows he or she has a cold to stand close to somebody? Couple. C, who believes it is not illegal? And okay, I see the hands are going down, which means we better get to the last one soon. A is not a law. It is illegal in Washington for a person who has a cold to stand next to somebody else. It is illegal in Boston to post an advertisement above a public urinal. You ready for the hardest one? All right. Number 1, it's illegal in Indiana to fish with your bare hands. It is illegal in Massachusetts to deface a milk carton. It's illegal in Maryland to retain an estate planning law firm which does not have the name Greenwald or Elbow. All right. I'm going to tell you ahead of time. C is actually a law. Okay. So anyway, Steve, which do you think?
I'm going to say B is
Steve, come on, Steve. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, Gary, quite a character. That concludes today's program. Before we go, a few really heartfelt thank yous to Steve and Gary for your leadership and your vision. To all of our presenters, yes, round of applause, please. To all of our presenters for sharing your expertise and commitment to education. To our vendors, Ten Oaks Ballroom for hosting us, putting on the Ritz for the wonderful food and the service, King Audio Visual, Dalton, Drew Tate, Olivia Wood for the pictures and the video. Thank you so much for capturing today's event. And to our attorneys and staff at Elbow & Associates and law offices of Gary Greenwald, thank you for your hard work and dedication every single day. And most importantly, thank you, our clients, our advisors, interested community members for being here today, for your trust, your continued support, and hope you had a great experience, and we'll see you again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.